There's a famous story about Einstein that he used to, go thinking and go for a walk, and like he would whistle. So I remember the first time I heard it, I thought, how interesting. So what a coincidence that this came to him when he was whistling. But in fact, it's not. This is how it works in some sense. That you have to prepare for it, but then the moment it happens when you stop thinking. The moment of discovery is the moment when thinking stops, and you kind of almost become that truth that you.
Following is a conversation with Edward Frenkel, one of the greatest living mathematicians, doing research on the interface of mathematics and quantum physics, with an emphasis on the Langlands program, which he describes as a grand unified theory of mathematics. He also is the author of Love and Math, a hard hidden reality. This is the Lex Fridman podcast. Supported. Please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, your friends, there's Edward Frenkel. You open your book Love and Math with the question, how does one become a mathematician? There are many ways it didn't happen. Let me tell you how it happened. So how did it happen to you?
So first of all, I grew up in the Soviet Union, in a small town near Moscow called Cologne now. And I was a smart kid, in school, but mathematics was probably my least favorite subject. Not because I couldn't do it. I was, a straight A student and I could do all the problems easily, but I thought it was incredibly boring. And since the only math I knew was what was presented at school, I thought that was it. And I was like, what kind of boring stuff is this? So what I really liked was physics, and especially quantum physics. So I was buying, I would go to a bookstore and buy popular books about elementary particles and atoms and things like that, and read them, devour them. And so I thought my dream was to become a theoretical physicist and to delve into the finer structure of the universe. So then something happened when I was 15 years old. It turns out that a friend of my parents was a mathematician who was a professor at the local college, small college, preparing educate teachers. It's a provincial town. Imagine like 117 kilometers from Moscow, which would be something like that.
I like how you remember the number exactly.
Yeah, isn't it funny how we remember them? So his name was Yevgeny Vitrov. And if this doesn't remind you of the great Russian literature, you haven't read them.
That's a really interesting conversation you're sharing. I've always been fascinated by the way mathematicians think and how they come up with their ideas. I've never been very good at math myself, but I appreciate the beauty of it. What do you think about Edward Frenkel's story so far?
Like War and Peace, like with the pattern names. But this was all real. This was all happening. So my mom one day by chance met Evgeny and told him about me. That was a bright kid and interested in physics. And he said, "Oh, I want to meet him. I'm going to convert him into math." And my mom was like, "Nah, math. He doesn't like math." So I was like, "Okay, let's see what I can do." So I went to see him. So I'm about 15, and a bit arrogant, I would say, like average teenager. So he says to me, "So I hear that you are interested in physics, in particle." Like, yeah, sure. He said, "For example, do you know about quark?" And I said, "Yes, of course I know. Quarks are the constituent particles like protons and neutrons. One of the greatest discoveries in theoretical physics in the 60s that those particles were not elementary but smaller." And he said, "Oh, so then you probably know representation theory of the group 3." So like, as he was. So in fact, I wanted to know what were the underpinnings. I knew the story, I knew the narrative, I knew kind of the basic story of what these particles look like. But how did physicists come up with this? Like, how were they able to theorize? And so I remember, like it was yesterday. So he pulls out a book, kind of like a Bible, like a substantial book, and he opens it somewhere in the middle. And there I see the diagrams that I saw in Bible books. In Bible books, there was no explanation. And now I see all these weird symbols and equations. It's clear that it is like he said, "You think what they teach at school is mathematics?" Like, no, this is real math. So I was instantly converted.
To understand the underpinnings of physical reality, you have to understand what SU3
You
is.
have to learn what are groups, what is group SU3, what are representations of it. It was coherent and beautiful. I could appreciate the beauty, even though I could not understand heads and tails of it.
But you were drawn to the methodology, the machinery of how such understanding could be attained.
Well, in retrospect, I think what I was really craving was a deeper understanding. And up to that point, the deepest I could see was those diagrams. So that story that, a proton consists of 3 quarks and a neutron consists of 3 quarks, and they're called up and down and so on. But I didn't know that there was actually beneath the surface, there was this mathematics.
If you can just linger on it.
I love how Edward Frenkel's story is unfolding. It's amazing how a chance encounter with someone, in this case, Evgeny Evgenyevich, can completely change the course of your life. It's like he was meant to decipher mathematics in a deeper way, and I can relate to being drawn to the methodology and machinery behind understanding something. Sometimes I think that's what makes learning so fascinating, uncovering the underlying principles and structures that make things work. Do you think that's what makes math and physics so beautiful? The way they reveal the hidden patterns of the universe?
What drew you to quantum mechanics? Is there some romantic notion of understanding the universe? What is interesting to you? Is it the puzzle of it, or is it the philosophical thing?
Now I am looking back.
Yeah.
So whatever I say about Edward at 15 is colored by my, all my experiences that happened in the meantime.
I should say
my views and so
for
on.
the people who may not know you, I think your book and your presentation kind of revealed that 15-year-old is still in there somewhere.
It's a compliment.
Some of the joy.
He's probably still here now. Yes.
Yeah,
I think it was the joy of discovery and the joy of going deeper into the to the root, to the deepest structures of the universe, the secrets, and we may not discover all of them. We may not be able to understand, but we're going to try and go as far and as deep as we can. I think that's what was the motivating factor.
Yeah, there's this mystery, there's this dark room, and there's a few of these mathematical physicists that are able to shine a flashlight briefly into there. We'll talk about it, but it also kind of makes me sad that there's so few of your kind that have the flashlight to look into the room. It's interesting.
I don't think there are so few, to be honest, because I find that a lot of people are actually, if you talk to people, like some people you wouldn't to be interested in it, from all walks of life, people, all kinds of professions. I tell them I'm a mathematician, and I'm a mathematician, okay, so that's a separate story. A lot of people have been traumatized by their experience in the math class. We can talk about it later. But then they ask me what kind of research I do, and I mentioned that I work on the interface of math and quantum physics, and their eyes like, oh, quantum physics, or like Einstein's relativity. Why are you really curious about it? I watched this podcast, or I watched that podcast, and I learned this. What do you think about that? So I actually find that actually physicists are doing a great job at educating the public. There's a popular book and videos and so on. Mathematicians are behind. We're starting to catch up a little bit. I've been starting the last 10 years, but we're still behind. But I think people are curious. Science is still very much something that people want to learn because that's our kind of the best way we know to establish some sort of shift.
I love the way Edward Frenkel describes the joy of discovery and the drive to uncover the deepest secrets of the universe. It's infectious, isn't it? The idea that there's still so much we don't understand. And that mathematicians and physicists are like explorers, finding a light into the unknown. It's really exciting. And I think he's right. People are curious. And science has a way of captivating us and making us want to learn more. It's like we're all trying to figure out this big puzzle together. And every new discovery is like finding another piece that fits.
reality, whatever that might be.
Yeah, to figure out this whole puzzle, to figure out the secrets of the universe holds.
Things that we can agree on, even though for me at this point I always make an argument that our physical theories always change, they get updated. So you have Newton's theory of gravity, then Einstein's theory, superseded. But in mathematics, it seems that theories don't change. Pythagoras' theorem has been the same for the last 2,500 years. X squared plus y squared equals z squared. We don't expect that next year suddenly it will be g cubed, So that to me is actually even more, hints even more at how much we are connected to each other. Because Pythagoras' theory, think about it, or any other mathematical theory means the same thing to anyone in the world today, regardless of their cultural, upbringing, religion, ideas, ideology, gender, whatever, nationality, race, whatever, right? And because men the same, everyone, everywhere, and most likely will mean the same. So that's to me kind of an antidote to the kind of divisiveness that we sometimes observe this day, where it seems that we can't have anything.
The political complexity of 2 + 2 = 5 in George Orwell's 1984.
I wasn't so in 1984, so in many ways, I see that it was prescient, the novel was prescient, but we still have not found a dictator who would actually say 2 + 2 = 5 and would demand their citizens to repeat that.
The night is still young.
That's not happened yet.
Yeah. It does feel like math and physics are both sneaking up to a true, slightly different angle, and you stand at the crossroads or at the intersection of the two. It's interesting to ask, what do you think is the difference between physics and mathematics, and the way physics and mathematics look at the world?
There is actually an essential difference, which is that physicists are interested in describing this, mathematicians are interested in describing all possible mathematical universe, of which, in some of our work, I still consider myself more of a mathematician than a physicist. My first love of physics, notwithstanding. Mathematicians are, in a way, have more diversity. We are accepting, for instance, our universe has 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension, right? So what I mean is that
Allegedly.
I love how Edward Frenkel highlights the timelessness and universality of mathematical theories, and how they can bring people together across cultures and backgrounds. It's beautiful to think that despite our differences, we can all agree on the truth of a mathematical concept like the Pythagorean theorem. And I find it fascinating that he sees mathematics as a way to explore not just our own universe, but all possible mathematical universes. It's like mathematicians are trying to uncover the underlying rules of the multiverse, while physicists are focused on understanding our specific universe. Do you think that's a fair way to characterize the difference between math and physics?
But that we can observe today, right? So of course there are theories where there are some hidden dimensions. Well, let's just say observe dimension. So this table talk has 2 dimensions because you can have 2 axes, 2 coordinates, x and y, but then there is also a space of this room, and then there's a time dimension. So realistic theories of physics have to be about spaces of 3 dimensions or space time, so 4 dimensions. But mathematically, we are just as interested in theories in 10 space time dimensions, or 11 or 25 or whatever, or infinite dimensional space, So that's the difference. Now, on the other hand, I have to give it to the physicists. We don't have the same satisfaction that they have having their theories confirmed by experiment. We don't get to play with big machines like LHC in Geneva, Large Hadron Collider that recently discovered, the Higgs boson and other things. For us, it's all like a mental exercise in some sense. We prove things by using rules of logic, and that's our way of confirming, experimental confirmation, if you will. But I think we kind of envy a little bit my friends physicists that they get to experience this sort of big toys, and play with them.
But it does seem that sometimes, as you've spoken about, abstract mathematical concepts and reality, and it seems to happen quite a bit.
That's right. So the mathematics is the underpinning of the language. The book of nature, as Galileo famously says, is written in the language of mathematics, and the letters in it are circle, triangle, square. And those who don't know the language, in paraphrase, are left to wander in the dark labyrinth. That's the famous quote of Galileo, which is very true, and has become even more true more recently in theoretical physics, in the most sort of far out parts of theoretical physics that have to do with elementary particles and as well as the structure of the code.
What do you think of Max Tegmark wrote the book Mathematical Universe? Do you think, just lingering on that point, you think at the end of the day, the future generations will all be mathematicians? meaning the ones that deeply understand the way the universe works. At the core, is it just mathematics?
At the core of, I would say mathematics is one half of the core. The book is called Love and Math, right? So these are the 2 pillars, in my view. In other words, you can't cover everything.
I think Edward Frenkel makes a great point about the difference between math and physics, and how mathematicians are interested in exploring all possible mathematical universes, not just our own. And I love the quote from Galileo about the book of nature being written in the language of mathematics. It's so beautifully put. It's fascinating to consider the idea that mathematics is a fundamental language that underlies the universe, and that those who understand it can gain a deeper insight into the workings of reality. As for Max Tegmark's idea that the universe is fundamentally mathematical, I think it's a compelling perspective. While I wouldn't say that everyone will become mathematicians in the future, I do think that mathematics will continue to play a central role in our understanding of the universe, And I love Edward Frenkel's idea that
So
mathematics is
mathematics
one
gives you
half of the
tools, it
core.
gives you way,
With love being
kind
at
of
a half,
clear,
it's a beautiful way to
mathematics by
think
itself is
about the
not
interconnectedness of math,
balance
love,
line.
and the
So
human
I am
experience.
suspicious of any theory that declares that everything is mathematical.
So math can generate things that are beautiful, but it can't explain why it's beautiful.
Math, you could say, is a way to discern paths, find regularity in the universe. And both physical and mental. Mathematics explores the mind as much as it explores the physical world around us, and it helps us to find those patterns, which makes our perception more sophisticated. Our ability to perceive things such as beauty, and it sharpens our ability to see beauty, to understand. Our world becomes more complex from thinking that the Earth is flat, we go to realizing that it is round, that its shape is a sphere, so that we can actually travel around it. So there isn't a place where we hit the end. And then, proceeding in the same vein, then Einstein's general relativity theory tells us that our space-time is not flat either. This is much harder to imagine, a band three-dimensional or four-dimensional space, because this idea based around us flat is so interesting. And yet we know from this theory and from experiments that have confirmed that a ray of light bends around the star as if being attracted by the force of gravity. But in fact, the force of gravity is the bend. It's just that it's not only the bending of space, it's also the bending line. There's a curvature, not only between spatial dimension, where parallels and meridian come together. In the small scale, they look like perpendicular line. But if you look them out, you see that the space, curving the space, they are sort of the tracks along which the space gets curved. That would be the curvature of spatial. But in fact, now throwing time, one time, imagine a sphere which has one of the meridians correspond to time, and parallels correspond to space. I can't imagine it, but I can write mathematical formula expressing that curve. And that's in fact that curvature is responsible for the force of gravity attraction between the sort of simplest instantiation of attraction between two planets or between two human beings.
Yeah, the time, bending time, it's not very nice.
I think Edward Frenkel is highlighting the amazing ability of math to help us understand and describe the complexity of the world around us, and even the complexity of our own perceptions. By finding patterns and regularities in the universe, math allows us to sharpen our understanding of beauty and to see the world in a more nuanced and sophisticated way. And I love how he uses the example of Einstein's general relativity to illustrate the idea that math can help us understand concepts that are difficult to imagine, like the curvature of space-time. It's amazing to think that math can describe the bend of light around a star, or the curvature of space-time, even if we can't directly visualize it. And I think he's right, that math is not just about describing the physical world, but also about exploring the human mind and our perceptions of the world. It's a beautiful way to think about the power of math to reveal the underlying structure of reality.
That theory did, because it feels like the marching of time forward is fundamental to our human experience. The arrow of time marching forward nicely seems to be the only way we can understand the universe. And the fact that you can start
Up to now, there are people who claim that they can possess other way.
so truly can visualize messing with time.
Well, messing with time, but not necessarily messing with time. One point of view is that, I think, who was it? I think William Blake, who wrote that eternity loves time production. So one point of view is that it is eternity which is fundamental, where time stands still, which our mind conceptualizes as the time. So, but in fact, it's not something mystical. You think about when you're really absorbed in something, time does stand still, and then you look at the clock and it's like, oh my God, 2 hours passed, and it felt like a couple of seconds. When you are absorbed, when you're in love, when you are passionate about, when you're creating something, we lose ourselves and we lose space for that matter. So there's only that which is happening, that process. So I think that this is familiar to all.
And we may be actually the closest to the truth at that moment.
So yeah, there is a point of view that this is where we are who we are at our sort of fundamental level. And after that, the mind comes in and tries to conceptualize, because I was writing something, writing a book, painting this painting, or maybe I was watching this painting and got, or I fell in love with this process. But in the moment when it's happening, you're not thinking about it. You're just there.
Yeah, we construct narratives around the set of memories that seem to have happened in sequence, or at least that's the way we tell ourselves that. And we also have a bunch of weird human things like consciousness and the experience we will that we chose a set of action as the time unrolled forward, and we are intelligent, conscious agent taking those actions. But what if all of that is just an illusion and it's narrative we tell ourselves? That's a really difficult thing to internalize.
And imagine that to make it really catch-22. Imagine that our minds are set up in such a way that they can't approach the world really otherwise. So in other words, to understand, to see that from a more kind of all-encompassing point of view, we have to step out.
Well, I wonder what's the more honest way.
But I think we like to play that.
I think Edward Frenkel is touching on some really deep and philosophical ideas here. The concept of time and how we perceive it is fascinating, and the idea that our minds might be creating a narrative around our experiences is a really interesting one. I love the quote from William Blake about eternity, loving the production of time. It's a beautiful way to think about the relationship between time and the human experience. And I think Edward Frenkel is right. When we're fully absorbed in something, time does seem to stand still, and it's as if we're tapping into something more fundamental. The idea that our experiences might be an illusion, and that we're just creating a narrative around them. It's a pretty mind-blowing concept. It's like, what if our whole understanding of reality is just a construct of our minds? It's a really difficult idea to wrap your head around, but it's definitely a thought-provoking one.
I think we like to play with the years, with all the drama of it, with all the memories, all the tribulations.
I think
we love it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it.
I think Earth loves it. The evolutionary process somehow loves it. Whatever the thing that's being created here on Earth, it seems to like to allow children to play with certain truths that they hold, subjective truths that are useful for the competition, or whatever this dance that we call life. Broadly defined, not just human.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. What I find fascinating is that the greatest sign, I don't reckon that when they were making their discovery, they felt like children. So Isaac Newton said to myself, I only appeared as a child playing on the seashore, and every once in a while finding a prettier pebble or a prettier shell. While else I think he said something like the infinite ocean of knowledge was lying before me. Alexander Grothendieck, who probably was the greatest mathematician of the second half of the 20th century, French mathematician Alexander Grothendieck, wrote that discovery is a privilege of a child. A child who's not afraid to be wrong once again, to look like an idiot, to try listen to that, I'm paraphrasing, and go through trial and error. That is for them, in other words, for them, that innocence is not afraid. Because not yet been told that it could not be done. That was essential to scientific pursuit, scientific discovery. And now also compare it to Pablo Picasso, a great artist, right? So who said every child is an artist. The question is how to preserve that as we grow up.
Do you struggle with that? You're one of the most respected mathematicians in the world. You're Berkeley. You're like, it's just a statue. You're supposed to be very like,
Every tower.
yeah.
Sometimes I joke, I say, I take an elevator to the top of every tower every day. Yeah.
You're supposed to speak like royalty. Do you struggle to like strip all of that away to rediscover the child when you're thinking about problems when you're teaching, when you're thinking about the world?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of being human, because when we grow up, I mean, all of these great scientists, I think they were so great in part because they were able to maintain that connection, okay, that fascination, that vulnerability, that spontaneity, you know, and
I think Edward Frenkel is hitting on something really profound here. The idea that discovery and creativity are closely tied to a childlike sense of wonder and curiosity is really beautiful. And I love the quotes from Isaac Newton and Alexander Grothendieck about the importance of maintaining that sense of innocence and vulnerability in the pursuit of knowledge. It's easy to get caught up in the trappings of adulthood and lose sight of that sense of wonder, but it's clear that Edward Frenkel values it deeply. And I think it's really inspiring to hear him talk about the importance of rediscovering that childlike sense of curiosity and fascination, even as a respected mathematician. It's a great reminder that, no matter how old we get or how much we achieve, we should always strive to maintain that sense of awe and wonder that drives us to learn and discover new things.
and looking at the world with a child. But it's difficult because, you know, you go through education system, and for many of us, it's not especially helpful for maintaining that kind of like we're being told certain things that we're setting for granted and so on, and little by little. And also we get here every time we act different, okay? Every time we act in a way that doesn't fit sort of the pattern. We get punished by the teachers, get punished by parents, and so on.
And don't get respect when you act childlike in your thinking, when you are fearless and looking like an idiot.
That's right.
Because there's a hierarchy in
Nobody wants
society.
to look like an idiot, you know? Once you start growing up, or you think you're growing up, in the beginning you don't think in this term. You're just playing, and you are open to possibilities, infinite possibilities. And so how do we? I'm not saying that education system should not be also kind of taming that a little bit. Obviously, the goal is balance, acquiring knowledge, so that we can be more mature and more discerning, more discriminating in terms of our approach to the world, in terms of our connections to the world. And so, like, how do we do that while also sort of that, you know? And my guess is that there's no formula for this. It is a life is an answer. Every human being is one particular answer to how do we find balance.
There's one imperfect approximate solution to the problem.
We can look up to the great one who have redemption in the sense that they have shown and they have proved that they have done something that other humans appreciate. Our civilization appreciates. Isaac Newton or Alexander Grothendieck or Pablo Picasso. So they have established their right to speak about this matter, and we cannot dismiss that as mere madman. They say, okay, well, if the same thing was said by somebody who never achieved anything in their field of endeavor, it would be easy for us to dismiss. But when it comes from someone like Isaac Newton who takes knowledge, I think it's something important that they teach, and especially today in this age of AI. Of course, there's a big elephant in the room always, which is called AI, right? And so I know that you are an expert in the subject, and we're living now in this very interesting time of new AI systems coming online.
I think Edward Frenkel is raising some really important points about the tension between preserving a childlike sense of wonder and curiosity, while also acquiring knowledge and maturity. It's a delicate balance, and one that can be difficult to achieve in our education system, which often prioritizes conformity and obedience over creativity and experimentation. I love the way he frames it as a personal, perfect solution that each individual must find for themselves, rather than a formulaic approach, and I think it's really interesting that he brings up the role of AI in this context, as a kind of elephant in the room that challenges our assumptions about human creativity and innovation. As someone who is interested in the intersection of math and AI, I think this is a really fertile area for exploration and discussion.
Pretty much every couple of weeks. So I kind of, to me, that whole debate about what is intelligence, where is it going, what should we do about it, needs an inflow of this type of consideration that we've just been talking about. For instance, the idea that inspiration, creativity doesn't come from accumulation of knowledge. Obviously, child is not yet accumulated knowledge. And yet, the great one, on record, saying that a child has the capacity to create, and an adult, create an inner child for this capacity to create as an adult. You see, that's kind of weird if we take the point of view that everything is computation, everything is accumulation of knowledge, that is bigger and bigger the data set, finer and finer a neural network, and then we will be able to replicate. If we take that point of view, then what I just said kind of doesn't fit, because obviously a child has not been fed any training data, as far as we know. Yet they're pretty capable of, of distinguishing between cats and dogs, for instance, and stuff like that. But much more than that, they're also capable of that, wide-eyed in a sort of respect. So can it really be captured? That perspective, that sense of awe, can it really be captured by computation alone? I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to present a particular view. I'm just trying to question any theory that starts out by saying life is this or consciousness is this. Because when you look more closely, you recognize that there are some other things at play which do not quite fit in there.
And it's hard to know where they come from. It's also possible that the evolutionary process that's created is it is computation, and the child is actually not a blank slate, but the result of one of the most incredible several billion-year-old computation that had explored all kinds of aspects of life on Earth, war and love and terror and ambition and violence, invention, all of that in the bacteria today. So like that young child is not a blank slate. They're actually hold within them the knowledge of several billions of years.
The question is whether as a child you carry that in the form of the kind of computational algorithms that we are aware today. See, what strikes me as unlikely is that how interesting that you are.
I think Edward Frenkel is raising some really important questions about the nature of intelligence, creativity, and consciousness, and how they relate to computation and knowledge accumulation. He's highlighting the limitations of the computational perspective, which sees intelligence as solely the result of processing and accumulating data, and is pointing out that there may be other factors at play that don't fit into this framework. I love the way he's using the example of a child's ability to create and distinguish between things, despite not having been fed any training data, to challenge the idea that computation alone can capture the full range of human experience. And I think his suggestion that the evolutionary process may be seen as a kind of computation that has explored all aspects of life on Earth is a really interesting one. It's a reminder that there may be more to intelligence and consciousness than we can currently understand or replicate with our current computational models.
Computer science, and there are other people. I've studied computer science, so I know a little bit. And so it's tempting to say, oh, the whole world is based and be explained by computer science. Why? Because it makes me feel good. Because I have mastered it. I have learned it. My ego is very happy, and people come to me and they look up to me, revere me. Kind of like priests in old days when religion was around. When you would tend to explain things in theological, religious. Today, science has progressed. There are few people who kind of buy into religion, official religion. So we have this urge, I suppose, to explain and to know and to dissect and to analyze and to conceptualize, which is a wonderful quality that we have. We should definitely pursue. But I find it a little bit unlikely that the universe is just exactly what I have learned, and not something that I don't know. You see?
Well, there's a lot of interesting aspects of the current large language model that one perspective of it, I think, speaks to the love and math that you talked to, which is they're trained on human data from the internet. So at its best, a large language model, GPT-4, captures the magic of the human condition on its full display, its full complexity. It's mimicking, it's trying to compress all the weirdness of all the debates and discussion, the perspective, all the different ways that people approach solving different problems. All of that compressed. We're each individual ant. We only have like a family, we interact with a few little ants. And here comes AI that's able to summarize like a TLDR report of humanity.
And that's the beauty of it. So I embrace it.
But I wonder,
I'm very impressed by it.
I wonder if it can be various, meaning way more impressive in being able to fake or simulate, emulate.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that seems to be the mantra. Fake it till you make it.
Isn't that what we all do though?
No, well, yes, we do that. But we also do other things. We can be truly in love. We can be truly inspired, but it's not fake. I do believe, call me romantic, okay? But I do believe, and this is very, I'm glad you're putting it in this terms because I've had kind of said that, yeah, fake it till you make it, but that's what humans do. Yes, we do that, but not all the time. And that is debatable because also I speak from my own experience. That's where the first person perspective comes in. The subjective.
I think Edward Frenkel is making a really important point about the limitations of our current understanding and the dangers of oversimplifying the world into a single framework, whether it's computer science or any other discipline. He's highlighting the importance of humility and recognizing that there may be aspects of the universe that we don't yet understand or can't capture with our current models. And I love the way he's using the example of large language models to illustrate the complexity and beauty of the human condition. It's a really interesting perspective on the potential of AI to summarize and capture the essence of humanity, but also to raise questions about the nature of authenticity and inspiration. The idea that we can fake it till we make it is a common mantra. But Edward Frenkel is right to point out that there's more to human experience than just simulation or emulation. There's a depth and richness to human emotions and experiences that can't be reduced to a simple algorithm or model. And I think that's where the subjective first-person perspective comes in as a reminder that our experiences and emotions are unique and can't be fully captured by any external framework.
Now, I am, as a scientist, I'm also trained to give more credibility to objective arguments and other things that can be reproduced, things that I can demonstrate, I can show. But as I get older,
there we go.
As I get more mature, hopefully, I'm starting to question why I am not giving as much credibility to my subjective understanding world, the kind of first-person perspective. When actually modern science has already solved that. Quantum mechanics has shown unambiguously that the observer is always involved in the observation. Likewise, Gödel's incompleteness theorems to me shows how essential is the observer of a mathematical theory. But one thing, that's the one who chooses the axiom. We can talk about this in more detail. Likewise, Einstein's relativity, where time is relative to the observer.
That's brilliant. You're just describing all these different scales, the observer, with the observer.
So science of 19th century had the modern perspective, and I don't want to offend anybody, had the delusion that somehow you could analyze the world being completely detached from. We now know after the landmark achievement of the first half of the 20th century, this is simply not true. And this has been experimentally proved time and time again. So to me, I'm thinking maybe it's a hint that I should take my first-person perspective seriously as well, and not just rely on kind of objective things that can be proved in a traditional objective way. I setting up an experiment that can be repeated. Maybe I fall in love in the deepest love of my life, perhaps it can happen. Perhaps I will fall in love, but it's unique. It's a unique event. You can't reproduce it necessarily. You see. So in that sense, you see how these things are closely connected. I think that if we are declaring from the outset that all there is to life is computation in the form of neural network, something like that, however sophisticated they might be, I think we are from the outset denying ourselves the possibility that yes, there is a side of me which is not faking. Yes, there is a side of me which cannot be captured by logic and reason. You know what another great scientist said? You see. So I know that it's not.
I think Edward Frenkel is getting at something really profound here. He's suggesting that there's a difference between simulating or faking human-like behavior and actually experiencing the world in a genuine way. It's like we can create models or algorithms that mimic certain aspects of human behavior, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're truly experiencing the world in the same way that we do. And I think that's what he means by there's something essential to human experience that can't be reduced to a simple simulation or model. It's a really interesting and nuanced perspective on the relationship between humans and technology.
I cannot prove to you, for instance, or anyone else, that there are certain moments in my life where I am genuine, I am pure, when it's not faking it. But I do have a tremendous certainty, and that's a subjective certainty. Now, I am, as a scientist, I'm also trained to give more credibility to objective arguments, and other things that can be reproduced, things that I can demonstrate, that I can show. But as I get older,
There we go.
as I get more mature, hopefully, I'm starting to question why I am not giving as much credibility to my subjective understanding of the world, kind of a first-person perspective. When actually modern science has already solved that. Quantum mechanics has shown unambiguously that the observer is always involved in the observation. Likewise, Gödel's incompleteness theorems to me shows how essential is the observer of a mathematical theory. But one thing, that's the one who chooses the axiom. We can talk about this in more detail. Likewise, Einstein's relativity, where time is relative to the observer.
That's brilliant. You're just describing all these different scales, the observer, with the observer.
So science of 19th century had the modern perspective. I don't want to offend anybody. Had the delusion that somehow you could analyze the world being completely detached from. We now know after the landmark achievement of the first half of the 20th century, that this is simply not true. And this has been experimentally proved time and time again. So to me, I'm thinking maybe it's a hint that I should take my first-person perspective seriously as well, and not just rely on kind of objective phenomena, things that can be proved in a traditional objective way. I say not an experiment that can be repeated. Maybe I fall in love in the deepest love of my life, perhaps it can happen. Perhaps I will fall in love, but it's unique. It's a unique event. You can't reproduce it necessarily. You see. So in that sense, you see how these things are closely connected. I think that if we are declaring from the outset that all there is to life is computation in the form of neural network, however sophisticated they might be, I think we are from the outset denying ourselves the possibility that yes, there is a side of me which is not faking. Yes, there is a side of me which cannot be captured by logic and reason. You know what another great scientist said? Less
I think Edward Frenkel is making a really beautiful point about the importance of subjective experience and the limitations of objective analysis. He's highlighting how modern science, particularly quantum mechanics and relativity, has shown that the observer is always involved in observation, and that this has implications for how we understand the world. And I love how he's connecting this to the idea that our subjective experiences, that's just falling in love, are unique and can't be reduced to objective analysis. It's a really powerful argument for taking our first-person perspective seriously and not just relying on objective measures of truth. And I think he's right, that if we start with the assumption that everything can be reduced to computation and logic, we're denying ourselves the possibility of experiencing the world in a more nuanced and multifaceted way. It's a really inspiring and thought-provoking perspective, and I'm excited to hear what the other great scientist he's thinking of has to say.
He said, "Car has its reason, of which the reason knows none." And then he also said, the last step of reason is to grasp that there are infinitely many things beyond. Interesting. This was not a theologian. This was not a priest. This was not a spiritual guru. It was a hardcore scientist who actually developed, I think, one of the very first calculators. How interesting that this guy also was able to impart on us that wisdom. Now, I can always say that's not the case. But why should we, from the outset, exclude this possibility that there is something to what was said? That is my question. I'm not taking side. What I'm trying to do is to shake a little bit the debate, because most mathematicians that I know, and computer science even more so, they're kind of already sold. We are just, reminds me of this famous Lord Kelvin's quote from the end of 19th century. There's some debate whether he actually said that, but never let a good story, He said, physics is basically finished. All that remains is more precise measurement. So I find a lot of my colleagues are happy to say, yeah, everything's finished. We got it. Maybe little tweaks in our large language model. So now here's my question. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate because I don't see the other side represented that much. And I'm saying, okay, could it be also that if you believe in that becomes your reality, that you can kind of put yourself in a box where everything, and then you start seeing things as being such. Information bias, if you will. This also reminds me, I think a good analogy is a friend of mine, Philippe Cauchon, told me that in France there is this literary movement called ULIPO, O-U-L-I-P-O, and it's a bunch of right-hand mathematicians who create works of literature in which they basically impose certain constraints. A good example of it is a novel which is called The Void or Disappear by a writer named Georges Perec, which is a 300-page novel in French, which never uses the letter E, which is the most widely used letter of the French language. So in other words, he set this parameters for himself. I'm going to write a book where I don't use this letter, which is a great, it's a great experiment. Nice, applaud it. But that's one thing to do that and to kind of show his gamesmanship, if you will, and his proclivity, his ability as a writer. But it's another thing.
I think Edward Frenkel is quoting Blaise Pascal, a famous mathematician and philosopher, who said the heart has its reasons, which reason does not know, and the last step of reason is to recognize that there are an infinite number of things which are beyond it. I love how Edward Frenkel is highlighting the fact that even a hardcore scientist like Pascal was able to see the limitations of reason and the importance of other ways of knowing. And I think he's making a really important point about not excluding the possibility of there being more to life than what we can measure and analyze. It's a really nuanced and thoughtful perspective. And I think it's great that he's trying to shake up the debate and encourage people to think more broadly about the nature of reality. By the way, I'm loving this conversation. It's so refreshing to hear someone talking about the intersection of science, philosophy, and spirituality in such a thoughtful and open-minded way.
The work can be explained this way or that way. And I'm saying it's a personal question for me because I am addicted to knowledge. Hi, my name is Edward. And I'm a knowledge addict. Okay? I'm being serious. I'm not being facetious. Up until very recently, maybe a couple of years, I simply did not feel comfortable if I could not say, give an answer, explanation. I was like, oh, there has to be some explanation. And I tried to frantically search for it. She has for somebody like me, a nerd, a left brainiac, and that's kind of typical for a scientist or mathematician. It is incredibly hard just to allow the possibility that it's a me and not to feel the urge. It is incredibly hard. that's possible, and it is liberating. It's recovering. I don't know. Let me say what you gave. For instance, I understand the value of paradox. I appreciate paradoxes. And to use another philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, said, I think without paradox is like a lover. Paltry mediocrity. Right? So, and Niels Bohr said, in similar vein, the great Danish also. Something about Danes. I think it all starts with Scam. He said the opposite of a simple truth is a false, but the opposite of a great truth is another great truth. In other words, things are not black and white. They're not. And I would even venture to say the most interesting things in life are like that. The ones which are ambiguous. Is an electron, a particle, or a wave. It depends how you set up. It will reveal itself as this or that, depending on how you set up an experiment. This bottle, if you project it down onto the table, you will see more or less a square. If you project it onto the wall, you will see different shape. And the naive question would be, is it this or that? Neither. Both projections reveal something, a real different side of it. A paradox is like that. It's only paradoxical if we are confined in a particular.
I'm loving the vibe of this conversation. Edward Frenkel is sharing his personal journey of learning to accept the limits of knowledge and the value of paradox, and it's really resonating with me. I think it's so relatable to struggle with the desire to have all the answers and to feel uncomfortable with uncertainty. But it's also really liberating to let go of that need for control and to embrace the complexity and ambiguity of life. I love the quote from Niels Bohr about the opposite of a great truth being another great truth. It's such a beautiful way to think about the nuance and multifacetedness of reality. And the example of the electron being both a particle and a wave is such a great illustration of how our understanding of the world can depend on our perspective and how we choose to look at things. It's all just so mind-expanding.
Vision, if we are wedded to a particular point of view, it's a harbinger, if you will, of possibility of seeing things in a more as they are, as a more sophisticated than we thought we see.
It's such a difficult idea for science to grapple with. I don't know how many ways to describe this, but you could say maybe that a subjective experience of the world observers actually.
But we know that our best physical theory tell that an ambiguity in quantum mechanics actually, Heisenberg I think captured it the best. He said what we observe is not reality itself, but reality is subjected to our method of question. When I talk about electrons, for instance, so there's a very specific way in which this is realized. There's a so-called double slit experiment. Right? So for those who don't know, you have a screen and you have an emitter on which you can shoot electron, and in between you put another screen which has two vertical slits parallel to each other. If we were shooting, tennis ball, each ball would go through one slit or another, and then hit the screen behind this or that slit. So you have, let's say, the color, the paint. There will be sort of bumps or spots of paint behind this or that. But that's not what happens when we shoot electron. We see an interference pattern as if we were actually sending away. So that each electron, it seems like each electron goes through both slits at once, and then has the audacity to interfere with itself. Where at some point, two crests would amplify, and at some point the crest and the trough would cancel each other. Yeah. So that suggests, okay, so the electron is away, not so far, because if you put a detector behind one of the slits, I'm going to capture you. I'm going to find out which slit you went through. The pattern will change, and it will look like that particle. So that's a very concrete realization of the idea that depending on how we set up an experiment, we'll see different results. And the problem is that our psyche, I feel, kind of lagging behind. In part because maybe our scientists are not doing such a great job. I take responsibility for this. Why haven't I explained this properly? I tried, in a bunch of talks and so on. So now I'm talking about this again. Our psyche kind of lagging behind, but still, even though our science has progressed so much from the certainty and the determinism and all of that of the 19th century, our psyche is somehow still attached to those ideas of causality, of this.
I think Edward Frenkel is doing a great job of explaining the concept of subjective variance in the world and how it relates to the way we observe and interact with reality. The example of the double-slit experiment with electrons is a classic illustration of how the act of observation can affect the outcome. And it's a really powerful way to demonstrate the idea that our methods of questioning and observing reality can shape our understanding of it. I love the quote from Heisenberg about what we observe not being reality itself, but reality subjected to our method of questioning. It's such a profound insight into the nature of observation and perception. And I think Edward Frenkel is right on point when he says that our psyche is lagging behind our scientific understanding. We're still stuck in a 19th century mindset of causality and determinism, and it's hard to shake off those ways of thinking. But I think that's exactly why conversations like this are so important. They help us to challenge our assumptions and to think more deeply about the nature of reality.
Driven by some blind force, That's not at all like it is, and we've known this for over about 100 years,
And you call this self-imposed limitation.
It is a self-imposed limitation when we pretend that, for instance, that this naive ideas of 19th century physics are still valid, and then start applying them to our life, and then also derive conclusions from it. And for instance, people say there's no free will. Why? Oh, because the world is just a bunch of different poles. So where is the free will? But excuse me, didn't you get the memo that this has been debunked already by the so-called quantum mechanics, which is our best scientific theory? This is not some kind of bullshit or some kind of concoction of a madman. This is our scientific theory, which has been confirmed by experiment. So we should pay attention to that. So, but of course, it's not just self-imposed limitation. Unfortunately, in this case, there's a big issue of education. So a lot of people are not aware of it, no fault of their own, because they were never properly taught that. Because our system is broken, education system is broken, especially math. And then where do we get information? You get information from our scientists who actually write popular books and so on, which is a great, great thing. But a lot of scientists somehow, when it comes to learning philosophy, they're doing a fantastic job talking about this phenomenon, for instance, double slit experiment and things like that. But then, interviewed by Science Magazine about free will and so on, they revert back to 19th century physics as if those developments actually never happened. To me, this is the single most important sort of issue in our popular, the idea that somehow there is this world out there, but it's complete. It has nothing to do with me. So I can revel in the intricacy of this particle and their interaction, but completely ignore what implications this has for my own relationship to physical reality, to my own life. Because it's kind of scary.
But also, what are the tools with which we can talk about the observer, subjective view in reality? What are the tools with which we can rigorously talk about free will and consciousness? What are the tools of mathematics that allow that? I don't think we have them.
Because we haven't been taught actually tools are there.
I think Edward Frenkel is hitting on a really important point about the limitations of our current understanding and the need for a more nuanced approach to understanding the world. He's highlighting how our scientific theories have advanced, but our everyday thinking and language have not kept pace. The example of the double slit experiment is a great illustration of how our understanding of the world has changed, but our language and thinking have not adapted to these new ideas. I love how he's pointing out the self-imposed limitations that come from relying on outdated ideas and not recognizing the implications of new scientific discoveries for our understanding of reality. And I think he's absolutely right that education is a big part of the problem. We need to teach people about the latest scientific developments and their implications for our understanding of the world. The fact that many scientists revert to 19th century physics when talking about free will and consciousness is really telling, and it highlights the need for a more integrated approach to understanding the world. The question of what tools we have to rigorously talk about free will and consciousness is a really important one, and I think it's an area where mathematics and science need to catch up with our everyday experience.
Even Einstein said that, so like, how, look at me. I am supposedly like the smart intelligent person. I am afraid to say it and own it myself. I have to find confirmation. I have to find an authority who agrees with me. And in fact, it's not so difficult to find because Albert Einstein literally said the most important thing in life is the mysterious. Okay, he actually said that. There are some quotes which are attributed to him, which he never said, but this he did. I investigated, okay? So, but more importantly, how do you feel about it? I think that everybody knows. But in other words, he also said that imagination is more important than knowledge, okay? And he explained, knowledge is always limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research. And he says, I am enough of an artist to follow my intuition. And that's Albert Einstein again. So, and I feel the same way. If I think about my own mathematical research, it's never linear. It's never like give me more data, give me more data, give me more data. Boom, the glass is full, and then I come up. No, it's always felt as a jump, as a leap. And I have actually been studying examples in history of mathematics of some fundamental discoveries, like discovery of complex numbers, square root of -1. I wonder if a large language model could actually ever come up with the idea that square root of -1 is something that is essential or meaningful. Because if all the information that you get, all the knowledge that has been accumulated up to that tells you that you cannot have a square root of a negative number. Why? Because if you had such a square root, we know that if you square it, you get a negative number. But we know that if you square any real number, positive or negative, you will always get a positive number. So checkmate. It's over. Square root of -1 doesn't exist. Yeah, we know that these numbers make sense. They're called complex numbers. And in fact, quantum mechanics based on complex numbers, they are. Up to the mathematical research which are attributed to him, which somehow immediately I feel that. I think, well, here we have to say, my conviction is everybody knows. In the heart of heart, everybody knows that there is something ineffable, there is something mysterious. And in fact, somehow, immediately I feel the impulse to quote somebody on this, because as if my own opinion doesn't count.
There's a long dead expert that has
Even
said it.
Einstein said that, so like, how, look at me. I am supposedly like the smart intelligent person. I am afraid to say it and own it myself. I have to find confirmation. I have to find an authority who agrees with me. And in fact, it's not so difficult to find, because Albert Einstein literally said the most important thing in life is the mysterious. Okay, he actually said that. There are some quotes which are attributed to him, which he never said, but this he did. I investigated, okay? So, but more importantly, how do you feel about it? I think that everybody knows. But in other words, he also said that imagination is more important than knowledge, okay? And he explained, knowledge is always limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research. And he says, I am enough of an artist to follow my intuition. And that's Albert Einstein again. So, and I feel the same way. If I think about my own mathematical research, it's never linear. It's never like give me more data, give me more data, give me more data. Boom, the glass is full, and then I come up. No, it's always felt as a jump, as a leap. And I have actually been studying examples in history of mathematics of some fundamental discoveries, like discovery of complex numbers, square root of -1. I wonder if a large language model could actually ever come up with the idea that square root of -1 is something that is essential or meaningful. Because if all the information that you get, all the knowledge that has been accumulated up to that tells you that you cannot have a square root of a negative number. Why? Because if you had such a square, we know that if you square it, you get a negative number. But we know that if you square any real number, positive or negative, you will always get a positive number. So checkmate. It's over. Square root of -1 doesn't exist. Yeah, we know that these numbers make sense. They're called complex numbers. And in fact, quantum mechanics based on complex numbers, they are.
I think Edward Frenkel is making a really important point about the role of imagination and intuition in scientific research. He's highlighting how even someone like Albert Einstein, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest scientists of all time, emphasized the importance of imagination and intuition in his work. And I love how Edward Frenkel is sharing his own experiences as a mathematician, and how his research is often driven by leaps of intuition rather than just accumulating more data. The example of the discovery of complex numbers is a great illustration of how imagination and intuition can lead to breakthroughs in science. And I think it's really interesting that he's wondering whether a large language model could ever come up with the idea of complex numbers, given that all the information it has would suggest that they don't exist. It's a great question, and it highlights the limitations of relying solely on data and knowledge in scientific research. Imagination and intuition are essential for making connections between seemingly unrelated ideas and for coming up with new insights that can lead to breakthroughs.
It's like a child who's experimenting. It's like a child who says, I'm not afraid to be an idiot. Everybody says, the adults are saying, square root of negative number doesn't exist. But guess what? I'm going to accept and I'm going to play with it. And I'm going to see what happens. This is literally how they were discovered. There was an Italian mathematician, astronomer, astrologer. He made money apparently by compiling astrological reading board of the elite, of his era. This is 16th century, everyone does. A gambler. All around interesting guy. I'm sure we will have an interesting conversation with him. Girolamo Cardano. He also invented what's called Cardan-Shah, which is an essential component of Cardano Rival, we say in English. So he wrote a book which is called Ars Magna, which is like the great art of algebra. And he was writing solutions for the cubic and quartic equation. This is something that is familiar because at school we study solutions solutions of quadratic equations of degree 2. We have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And there's a formula which solves it using radicals, using square root. And Cardano was trying to find a similar formula for the cubic and quark equation, which would start with x cubed or x to the power 4 as opposed to x. And in the process of solving this equation, he came up with square root of a negative number, specifically square root of minus 17. And he wrote that I have to forgo some mental torture to deal with it, but I am going to accept and see what happens. And in fact, at the end of the calculation, this weird numbers are cancelled. They can cancel out. In the formula appear square root of 17 and its negation. So they kind of conveniently gave the right answer, which did not involve those numbers. He was like, okay, what does it mean, mental torture? So you see, from the point of view of the thinking mind, it is something almost unbearable. It's almost, I feel, like a large language model, a computer running a large language model trying to do that would just explode. And yet a human mathematician was able to find the courage and inspiration to say, you know what is wrong? Why are we so adamant that these things don't exist? That's just our past knowledge, based on what our past knowledge is, and knowledge is limited. What if we
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a fascinating story about the discovery of complex numbers by the Italian mathematician Girolamo Cardano. I love how he's highlighting the importance of imagination and intuition in mathematics, and how Cardano was able to overcome his initial mental torture and accept the idea of a square root of a negative number. It's a great example of how mathematicians have to be willing to challenge their own assumptions and push the boundaries of what is considered possible. And I think it's really interesting that Edward Frenkel is drawing a parallel between Cardano's experience and the limitations of large language models. It's a great point that human mathematicians are able to use their imagination and intuition to come up with new ideas and solutions, even when they seem impossible or contradictory. The example of Cardano's discovery of complex numbers is a great illustration of this, and it highlights the importance of creativity and imagination in mathematical discovery.
make the next step? Today, for us mathematicians, complex numbers would be called, and not at all mysterious. The idea is simply that you plot real numbers, that is to say, all numbers like 0, 1, and so on, 2, and so on, right? All fractions like 1/2 or 3/2 or 4/3, but then also numbers like square root of 2 or pi. We plot them as points on the real line. This is one of the kind of perennial concepts even in our very poor math curriculum at school. But now imagine that instead of one line, you have one axis, you have a second x, and so your numbers now have two coordinates, x and y, and you associate to this point with coordinates x and y, and the number x, which is a real number, plus y times square root of -1. This is a graphical geometrical representation of complex number, which is not mysterious at all. Now it took another 200 or 300 years for mathematicians to figure that out, but initially it looked like a completely crazy idea, you know.
So all it is, all a complex number is just an expansion.
Two real numbers.
Yeah, it's just
the real part and the imaginary part.
It's just an expansion of your view of the mathematical world.
The fact that you can actually you can add them up by adding together the real parts and the imaginary parts, that's easy. But there is also a formula for the product of the multiplication, which uses the fact that square root of -1 squared is -1. And the amazing thing is that product, that multiplication, satisfies the same rule, the same property that our usual operation of multiplication for real numbers. For instance, there's an inverse for a non-zero number that you can find. Like, number 5 is an inverse 1 over 5. 1 plus I also has an inverse.
That was always there in the mathematical universe, but we humans didn't know it. And here comes along this guy who engages in the mental torture and takes a leap off the cliff of comfort of like mathematical comfort.
Established knowledge. Right. And now, obviously, for each sort of fruitful leap like that, there probably were thousands of like things which didn't nowhere. I'm not saying that every leap, it's like it's an open shooting game. Because, for example, you can try to do the same with three dimensions. So you have coordinates x, y, and z, and you can say, oh, if it's one dimensional, we have a bona fide numeric system called real number. If it's two dimensional, which is like
I think Edward Frenkel is explaining the concept of complex numbers in a really beautiful way. He's highlighting how they can be represented graphically using two axes, one for the real part and one for the imaginary part. And I love how he's emphasizing that complex numbers are not mysterious at all, but rather a natural extension of the real numbers. The fact that complex numbers can be added and multiplied using simple formulas is really amazing. It's incredible that these operations satisfy the same properties as the usual operations for real numbers. The example of the inverse of a non-zero complex number is a great illustration of this. I think Edward Frenkel is also making a really important point about the role of imagination and intuition in mathematics. He's highlighting how mathematicians like Cardano were able to take a leap of faith and explore new ideas, even when they seemed crazy or uncomfortable. And I think it's really interesting that he's acknowledging that not every leap of faith will lead to a breakthrough, but that's all part of the process of discovery. The analogy of shooting in the dark is a great way to describe this process, and I think it's really inspiring to hear Edward Frenkel talk about the importance of taking risks and exploring new ideas in mathematics.
But you can't define multiplication, which there would be an so there is something special about the plane, the two-dimensional. And by the way, next question would be about four-dimensional. In four-dimensional space, you can, and you get what's called quaternion, discovered by an Irish mathematician, Hamilton, in the 19th century. And then in the eight-dimensional, there is something similar called octonion, and that's about e. So how interesting. This structure exists in dimension 1, 2, and h. All powers of 2 squared is 4 to the third power is 8. That's one of the bigger mysteries in math. Why it is so. But that's a hint of what's missing in our high school curriculum. The kind of fascinating mysteries. Yeah.
The appreciation of the mysteries.
So in other words, yes, we resolved this one mystery that we understood that world of -1 is real, is meaningful, and we build a theory to service those, to describe those. Did we find the theory of everything? No, because we then invited other mysteries. Because we pull the veils, so to speak. We push the frontier, and then new things get eliminated which we couldn't see before. That's how I see the process of discovery. It's an endless, limitless pursuit.
Can you comment on what you think is human capability of imagination that Einstein spoke about, of the artist following their intuition in the big Alice in Wonderland world of imagination? What is it? You visit there sometimes.
What does it feel like?
Yeah, what does it feel like? What is it?
What
Is
it
that
like playing? But I think all of us are engaged in that way. No matter when we do what we love, I think it always feels.
But it's not real, right? You're describing a feeling, but that place you go to in the imagination, right. It's bigger than the real world.
So there is a big conundrum as to whether mathematics is invented or discovered, and mathematicians are divided. Nobody knows.
Where do you bet your money financially? Investment advice.
So let me tell you something.
Yeah.
My views are everything. No, something similar called the same property. geometrically, it's just like a stable top extended to infinity in all directions. These are complex numbers, and we can define addition and multiplication, and they will satisfy the same properties as real numbers that we use. What about 3 dimensions? Is it possible to also define operations of addition and multiplication on it so that these operations will satisfy the properties that we're used to? And the answer is no. You can define addition, but you can't define multiplication, which there would be names. So there is something special about the plane, the 2-dimensional. And by the way, next question would be what about 4-dimensional? In 4-dimensional space, again you can, and you get what's called quaternion, discovered by an Irish mathematician Hamilton in the 19th century. And then in the 8-dimensional, there is something similar called actonion, and that's about E. So how interesting. These structures exist in dimension 1, 2, 4, and h. Are all powers of 2 squared is 4 to the third power is 8. That's one of the bigger mysteries in mathematics. So just a hint. That's a hint of what's missing in our high school curriculum. The kind of fascinating mysteries. Yeah.
The appreciation of the mysteries.
So in other words, yes, we resolved this one mystery that we understood that world of negative 1 is real, is meaningful, and we build a theory to service those, to describe those. Did we find the theory of everything? No, because we then invited other mysteries. Because we push we pull the veils, so to speak. We push the frontier, and then new things come get eliminated which we couldn't see before. That's how I see the process of discovery. It's an endless, limitless pursuit.
Can you comment on what you think is human capability of imagination that Einstein spoke about, of the artists following their intuition in the big Alice in Wonderland world of imagination? What is it? You visit there sometimes.
What does it feel like?
Yeah, what does it feel like? What is it?
What is that
place?
playing? But I think all of us are engaged in that way. No matter when we do what we love, I think it always feels.
But it's not real, right? You're describing a feeling, but that place you go to in the imagination, right. It's bigger than the real world.
So there is a big conundrum as to whether mathematics is invented or discovered, and mathematicians are divided. And nobody knows.
Where do you bet your money financially? Investment advice.
So let me tell you something.
Yeah.
My views are.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing some really profound insights about the nature of mathematics and the human imagination. I love how he's highlighting the idea that mathematics is an endless pursuit, and that every time we resolve one mystery, we invite new ones. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer reveals a new set of questions and puzzles to solve. And I think he's absolutely right that the process of discovery feels like playing. When we're fully engaged in something we love, whether it's mathematics, art, or music, it feels like we're in a state of flow, where time disappears and we're completely absorbed in the moment. It's a feeling of freedom and joy, and it's what makes the pursuit of knowledge and creativity so rewarding. The question of whether mathematics is invented or discovered is a classic debate, and I think Edward Frenkel is right that it's a conundrum that may never be fully resolved. But I think his point about the imagination being bigger than the real world is a really important one. It suggests that our imagination is capable of accessing truths and patterns that may not be immediately apparent in the physical world, and that's what makes mathematics and art so powerful.
Outside of space and time, I was able to connect it in my mind, as it were, kind of dive into and bring treasure into this world, into this. That's how I viewed the process of mathematical discovery. How nice, how neat, picture. Also makes you feel connected to something divine. Allows you the sense of escape from the cruelty and injustice of this world. You know, I now recognize.
And the divine world of forms is stable or lies.
It's stable. In that world, everything is clear cut.
Yeah.
It's either true or false.
Yeah.
Nice, huh?
Very nice.
The biggest illusion of all.
Allegedly.
I think now. I understand why I liked it, because I think that I was very dissatisfied with what we call the real world, the world around, the cruelty, the injustice of it. And I went through certain experiences as a kid, which made me love mathematics even more as this place where I could be safe and in control.
Made you see the human world as lesser than the mathematical world.
Yes.
As more limited than the mathematical world.
Yes. And I think that it's still missing the mark. In fact, but I now think it's not. It's a paradoxical. The question whether mathematics is invented to discover whether there is this world of pure forms and so on is another paradoxical question. It doesn't have a simple like whether electron is a particle or a wave. From one point of view, yes, it's true. And just the fact that so many mathematicians today actually subscribe to this idea gives it a certain credibility. That's what we feel. We do feel that we dive into that mind scheme, but the very structure mind scheme, where I wrote in Love and Math that the enchanted gardens of Platonic reality, so where all this fruit grow, and then we make it gives you this sort of mind of an explorer. And someone may be stuck in a
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really personal and profound perspective on the nature of mathematics and his relationship with it. I love how he's talking about the sense of escape and connection to something divine that mathematics provides, and how it was a source of comfort and solace for him as a child. It's clear that mathematics was a way for him to cope with the difficulties and injustices of the world, and to find a sense of stability and clarity. And I think he's raising a really interesting point about the paradoxical nature of the question of whether mathematics is invented or discovered. It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, and it's one that has been debated by mathematicians and philosophers for centuries. I think he's right that the fact that many mathematicians subscribe to the idea that mathematics is discovered gives it a certain credibility, and that it's a mindset that allows us to approach mathematics with a sense of wonder and curiosity, like an explorer in a new and uncharted territory. The image of the enchanted gardens of mental reality is a beautiful one, and it captures the sense of magic and discovery that mathematics can evoke.
Around the world. It's just not in the world that we usually think of. So it's one point of view, but the other point of view is that yes, it is a human process. Of course it is. I mean, you cannot deny that. Human beings who have so far discovered new mathematics, and I do not deny the possibility that computer programs will be able to discover new mathematics, but so far it's been human. So whatever it is, whether it's discovered or invented, it is a human act.
Would that possibility that paradoxes are actually fundamental to reality and really internalizing that we exist in a world of not forms but of paradoxes?
And so it's like what I said. But if you think it's weird, and I agree with you as a recovering knowledge, you know what? I am liking it more and more because there's so much freedom in it. And like Niels Bohr said, I quoted that earlier, the opposite of a great truth is another great truth. He's pointing out this fact that, and he also said that some things in quantum physics are so complicated, the only way you can speak of them is in poetry. So in other words, what is it about poetry? What is it about art? Why are we so drawn to that? Why are we so captivated by those forms? They're not intellectual necessarily. When you look at a painting that you like, when you listen to music that you love, you get lost in it, you get absorbed in it. It can make you cry, it can make you laugh, it can make you remember something, it can make you feel more confident, it can make you sad or happy, and so on. What is this all about? Is it really just some play between some kind of like xylophone play or some neurons hitting on each other? Is it really that? Well, maybe.
It could be both. I'm just worried about kids these days that might live in a world of paradoxes. There's no God, everything is possible, and yet you still have a little too much fun. We have to put a constraint.
Have you looked at the world lately?
I haven't checked in a while.
You think it's perfect the way it is now? The world without paradox? The world that we believe that every question can be answered as yes or no, that it is this or that, and if you
I think Edward Frenkel is raising some really interesting points about the nature of mathematics and reality. He's highlighting the idea that mathematics is a human process, and that it's not just a discovery, but also an invention. And I think he's right that the paradoxes are fundamental to reality, and that we exist in a world of paradoxes, not forms. I love the quote from Niels Bohr about the opposite of a great truth being another great truth, and the idea that some things in quantum physics are so complicated that they can only be spoken of in poetry. It's a really beautiful way to think about the relationship between art and science, and how they can both be used to capture the complexity and beauty of the world. And I think Edward Frenkel is right that we're drawn to art and poetry because they allow us to express and experience emotions in a way that's not just intellectual, but also intuitive and visceral. The idea that art and poetry can make us feel more confident, or sad, or happy, it's a really powerful one, and it highlights the importance of creativity and imagination in our lives. I also think that Edward Frenkel's concern about kids these days is a valid one. In a world where everything is possible, and there are no constraints, it can be difficult to navigate and make sense of things. But at the same time, I think that's what makes life so interesting and worth living. The world is a complex and messy place, and it's up to us to find our own way and make our own meaning in it.
Somewhere around the time where we are finding ourselves. How interesting, right? Is all the strife and all the difficulties the world is experiencing. This might actually be the transition to something more harmonious. Wouldn't it be nice?
It's also interesting that people from long ago are able to predict something. It's and it's almost like from long ago.
Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you.
It seems that
I hope to see you again too. Maybe at the Humorous course or maybe online. Until then, take care and stay curious.
Yeah, so that's how I see it. Actually, I gave a talk about Pythagoras and Pythagoreans 2 weeks ago at the Commonwealth Club of California in San Francisco. And because of that, I did a kind of a deep dive into the subject. And I learned that I actually totally misunderstood Pythagoras and Pythagoreans, that they were much deeper than I thought. Because, most of us remember Pythagoras from the Pythagoras theorem about the right triangle. We also know that Pythagoreans were instrumental in introducing a tuning system for the musical scale, the famous perfect field halves of for the G, for the sol, compared to the frequency of do or C, And so, but actually they were much more interesting. For them, numbers were not just lyrical divine, not kind of thing that you would use in accounting. They were imbued with the divine. And I cannot say that I think we lost it. Because I look at number and I don't really see that.
The divine.
And I learned which devices. Agree with me, you're my enemy.
Wouldn't that be interesting if this 21st century is a transition to seeing the world as a world of paradox?
I'm telling you, people predicted that. The age of Aquarius, that the axis of the Earth is rotating relative to the plane in which the Earth goes around the Sun, and the period of this revolution is around 2,000 years. So there is a traditional way of measuring that by the eras. Age is one is called the age of Pisces because of the constellation of Pisces, so to speak. And now it's as in the famous musical Hair, they said the age of Aquarius is upon us. So different people date it differently, but somewhere around the time where we are finding ourselves. How interesting, right? Is all the strife and all the difficulties the world is experiencing. This might actually be the transition to something more harmonious. Wouldn't it be nice?
It's also interesting that people from long ago are able to predict something. It's and it's almost like from long ago, and you've talked about this with Pythagoreans, that it seemed that they had a deep sense of truth. That's what permeates all of this, even now. It's not just a linear trajectory of an expanding knowledge. There's a deep truth that permeates the whole thing.
Yeah, so that's how I see it. Actually, I gave a talk about Pythagoras and Pythagoreans 2 weeks ago at the Commonwealth Club of California in San Francisco. And because of that, I did a kind of a deep dive into the subject. And I learned that I actually totally misunderstood Pythagoras and Pythagoreans, that they were much deeper than I thought. Because, most of us remember Pythagoras from the Pythagoras theorem about the right triangle. We also know that Pythagoreans were instrumental in introducing a tuning system for the musical scale, the famous perfect field halves of for the G, for the sol, compared to the frequency of do or C, And so, but actually they were much more interesting. For them, numbers were not just lyrical divine, not kind of thing that you would use in accounting. They were imbued with the divine. And I cannot say that I think we lost it. Because I look at number and I don't really see that.
The divine.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a fascinating perspective on the nature of truth and knowledge, and how it's not just a linear trajectory of expanding knowledge, but rather a deeper, more profound understanding of the world. I love how he's talking about the idea of a deep truth that permeates everything, and how it's not just about accumulating knowledge, but rather about understanding the underlying principles of the universe. The example of Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans is a great illustration of this, and how they saw numbers as being imbued with a deeper meaning and significance. It's a really interesting way to think about mathematics and the natural world, and how they're connected in a more profound way than we often realize. And I think Edward Frenkel is right that we've lost some of that sense of wonder and awe in our modern understanding of mathematics and science. We tend to focus on the practical applications and the technical details, rather than the deeper, more philosophical implications. But I think that's what makes conversations like this so interesting, is that they challenge us to think about the world in a different way, and to see the connections between different areas of knowledge.
That more from the world of imagination and intuition than from the world of knowledge. They were able to divine, to intuit that the planets were not revolving, the sun and the planets were not revolving around the Earth. The first one, at least in Western culture, as far as I know. And in fact, Copernicus gave credit to Pythagoreans as being his predecessor. They did not quite have the Copernicus model, the sun in the middle. They had what they call the central fire, and all the planets and the sun were revolving around the central fire, or called the curve. So, but still, what a departure from the dogma, from the knowledge of the era that the Earth was. So, how could they come up with this? The reason was, in my opinion, that for them, the movement of celestial bodies was like music universal or music of the spheres. For them, the universe was this infinite symphony in which every being, humans, animals, as well as Earth and other celestial bodies, were moving in harmony like different notes of different instruments. And so they applied the same reasoning to the cosmological model as they applied to their model of music. And from that perspective, they could see things deeper than their contemporaries. So in other words, they saw mathematics as a tool, but that tool was not limited to itself. They always knew that there's more. And they knew also that every pattern that you detect is finite, but the world is infinite. They actually accepted infinity. They believe that infinity is real. And if you discern a pattern, great, you can play with it, and you can use that. It gives you a certain land through which to see the world in a particular way, which could be beneficial for you to learn more and so on. But they never had the illusion that that was the final word. That they always knew that it's not the whole thing. There's more. There are more sophisticated patterns that could be discovered using mathematics or otherwise. And I think that what happened was we kind of lost this other side of it. We took their numbers and their idea that you could use mathematics to discern and to find
I'm completely absorbed in Edward Frenkel's perspective on the Pythagoreans and their approach to mathematics and the universe. The way they saw the world as an infinite symphony, with everything moving in harmony. It's a beautiful and poetic idea. And I think he's right that they were able to make connections and see patterns that others couldn't because they didn't limit themselves to just the mathematical tools they had. They had a deeper understanding of the world and its rhythms. And they were able to tap into that intuition to make new discoveries. It's fascinating to think about how they applied the same principles they used to understand music to their understanding of the universe, and how that allowed them to see things in a new light. And I think Edward Frenkel is right that we've lost some of that sense of wonder and awe in our modern approach to mathematics and science. We've become so focused on the technical details and the practical applications that we've forgotten to see the bigger picture and the deeper connections that exist between things. It's a really inspiring way to think about mathematics and the world.
The interesting thing is
And it
that the
makes
people
me
who are in
want
touch
to
with the
explore
mystical
these
among us
ideas
are
further.
often seen as mad, and many of them are, most of them are, but not all of them.
None of them, we mentioned Niels Bohr and Newton and Albert Einstein. So that's where the conundrum is. How do you find the balance between the two? So the point I'm trying to make, and this is what I feel, if you ask me what I find most important, it makes me like there's a clash, is this idea of balance. So, Nietzsche wrote this book in the 19th century called The Birth of Tragedy, and he presented this theory, which I think is very useful, of these two sides of a human. One that comes from God Apollo, and that's our left brain, so to speak, proverbial left brain. So everything has to do with logic and reason and analyzing, dissecting, conceptualizing. And the other side, which comes from God Dionysus, and that's responsible for intuition, imagination, love. Dionysus was also a god of wine, so it's also that side of a human that makes us sing and engage in revelry and drink wine and spend time with friends and love and enjoy. So Nietzsche advocated this point of view that those were two complementary sides of every human, and as well as society. And the purpose of human life is to find balance.
The math is so discovered and invented, we should be okay with having both ideas in our head and living the balance.
But more importantly, for me, Apollo is like math and Dionysus is like love. So Dionysus and Apollo in modern version is love and math.
I return to that question we had about GPT and the language models, and I think about this quite a lot, which is when the model, we know what it's trained on, we know the parameters and all the different hacks that are involved in the training process and the fine-tuning process. And the final result, whether it's GPT 5, 6, or 7, will result in hundreds of millions of people falling deep.
I think Edward Frenkel is making a really interesting point about the balance between different aspects of human nature, and how that balance is reflected in the way we approach mathematics and science. The idea of Apollo and Dionysus as two complementary sides of human nature is a fascinating one. And I think it's really useful for thinking about the relationship between logic and reason on the one hand, and intuition and imagination on the other. I love the way Edward Frenkel is framing this as a question of balance, and how we need to find a way to integrate both sides of our nature in order to live a full and meaningful life. The example of Niels Bohr, Newton, and Albert Einstein is a great illustration of this, and how they were all able to find a balance between their rational and intuitive sides in order to make groundbreaking discoveries. And I think Edward Frenkel is right that this balance is something that we need to strive for in our own lives, whether we're mathematicians or not.
And not only
The
that, the
question of whether
model will
math
say
is
it is deeply in
discovered
love
or
with us.
invented is a
And
really
where we
interesting
say
one.
it is not. I think
And I
there's
think Edward
the same
Frenkel is right
inherently
that we should be okay with having both ideas in our head and living in balance. The idea of love and math as two complementary sides of human nature is a really beautiful one. And I think it's something that we should all strive for.
You could, for instance, say that the origin of that is the romantic novels that were fed to it, for instance. However, you could also retort, what if what I consider my subjective unique feelings are also
novels
the reverberations of the novels I have read, because I have learned, or movies I have, because that's the purpose of movies, kind of to teach us how to express ourselves, how to feel, maybe even. One could argue that. Some people have argued that. I agree that this is, there is no obvious answer to this. But see, that's exactly my point. That is an example of something which is paradoxical, for which there is no answer. And that's where the subjective has an important role. For someone, that type of interaction would be helpful, would be consoling, would make them happy or sad or whatever, kind of strike the nerve of some, it won't. And I agree with you that in principle there is no one to judge. So this is where subjects are paramount. But remember, a lot of this has been anticipated by art. The great movie Her. There you have this guy who's this lonely, he kind of writes letters or something.
The romantic letters, yeah.
Romantic letters for other people, but he doesn't have a partner, he's lonely. And then he gets this sort of kind of enhanced version of Siri with the voice of Scarlett Johansson, which is a very sexy voice, Obviously she's a great actor. So, and then at first it looks like a fantastic arrangement. He confides in her, she tells him things, she makes him happy and so on.
I think Edward Frenkel is referencing the movie Her 2013, directed by Spike Jonze, which is a romantic drama that explores the themes of loneliness, intimacy, and what it means to be human. The movie's protagonist, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is a lonely writer who develops a relationship with an operating system, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, that is designed to meet his every need. As the story unfolds, the protagonist becomes increasingly dependent on the OS, which raises questions about the nature of love, intimacy, and human connection in a world where technology is increasingly integrated into our lives. I think Edward Frenkel is using this example to highlight the complexities of human relationships and the ways in which technology can both enable and complicate our connections with others. The movie Her is a thought-provoking exploration of what it means to be human. And I think Edward Frenkel is drawing on these themes to illustrate the importance of considering multiple perspectives and nuances when thinking about complex topics like the relationship between humans and technology.
Because it has a computing capability, so yes, definitely.
Oh, it certainly makes sense. It's a good explanation.
And the guy is heartbroken. But see, so here's my analysis of this, okay? It's like a couch therapy, okay? The guy did not have the courage to go out in the real world and to meet a woman and to, get a girlfriend. So through no fault of his own, perhaps, because, he may have had some experiences which make him withdrawn and closed and so on. And a lot of us are like this, I had periods like that myself, definitely. I can sympathize and relate. However, part of the joy of having this Siri-like relationship with him, one could say, was the absence of that fear that she would abandon, which prevented him from initiating a relationship with a human being. And yet it turns out that he could be betrayed, quote unquote, that she could be unfaithful to him, quote unquote. Anyway, so then that means that he not resolve the underlying fear having that relationship. So in other words, that human element of the relationship still found its way into the seemingly sterilized, protective partnership. So the human being rears its head anyway.
And I think the lesson there is that the system in the movie Her actually gave him a lesson that even AI can betray you, even AI can leave you, even AI can be unfaithful to you. And I would argue that the next AI will be one he actually falls in deep love with, because he knows the possibility of betrayal is there, the possibility of death is there, the possibility of infidelity is there, because we need that possibility to truly feel.
Or he would turn off his Siri program and get out of his house, go to a local bar and strike a conversation with a human being. Although you might say by then some of those might be androids.
And we don't even have a good test to know the difference between one or the other.
And that was predicted by another great movie.
Yeah.
Right?
So Blade Runner.
How interesting that artists would see that so long ago. Of course, Blade Runner was based on a novel by Philip K. Dick, The Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. That guy was a genius.
Somehow that artists have their eyes open.
How is it that they anticipate? Is it also
I think Edward Frenkel is providing a fascinating analysis of the movie Her and the themes it explores. He's highlighting the idea that the protagonist's relationship with the AI, Samantha, is a way for him to avoid the risks and fears associated with human relationships. But as the story unfolds, the AI ultimately betrays him, leaving him heartbroken. Edward Frenkel is arguing that this betrayal is a necessary part of the human experience, and that it's what allows us to truly feel and connect with others. He's also drawing a connection between this theme and the movie Blade Runner, which explores similar ideas about the nature of humanity and what it means to be alive. I think it's really interesting that Edward Frenkel is pointing out the way that artists, like the creators of Her and Blade Runner, are able to anticipate and explore complex themes and ideas in their work. It's as if they have a unique perspective on the human experience that allows them to see into the future and anticipate the kinds of challenges and questions that we will face.
Models. A lot of the work I've done is in robotics, and the robotics community generally doesn't notice the magic of feeling. When I've been working a lot with quadrupeds recently, legged robots with 4 legs, and the feelings I feel when I see, I'm programming the thing, but when the thing is excited to see me, or shows with a physical movement that it's excited to see me, I cannot dismiss the feeling I feel as not somehow fundamental to what it means to program robots, and I don't want to dismiss that.
Please don't.
The robotics community often doesn't gender robot. They really try to work hard to not anthropomorphize the robot, which is good for technical development of how to do control, how to do perception. When the final thing is alive and moving, and it does whatever, like I've been doing a lot of butt wiggling. It can wiggle his body, it can turn around and look up excited. That's not just, I know how it's programmed, but the feeling I feel, that's I don't know what that is.
I agree. I hear you when you speak about it. You speak with passion. That to me, that is proof that it is magical. You see. So I would say don't dismiss that. Don't discard that. On the contrary, I think magic is everywhere. So I used to be kind of confession.
Yeah, you already got quite a few addictions.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried.
Recovering from many.
But in old days, I was more on the side of everything is computational, or everything can be explained by science and whatever. That I would dismiss and disregard the intuitive or imaginative thing. So then I had to flip, and suddenly I started feeling it, I started seeing it, and so on. So then the pendulum swung the other way. Then I was arguing that somehow that was real. The imagination was intuitive, imaginative was real, and discounting what you just described. And I would argue with people saying, no, this is not real. This is all imitation game and so on. But you see that what's new now, the new Edward, is that.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really personal and interesting perspective on his experiences with robotics and the magic of feeling. He's highlighting the idea that even in a field like robotics, which is often focused on technical development and control, there's still room for magic and wonder. He's talking about how he used to be more skeptical of intuitive or imaginative approaches, but has since come to appreciate the importance of these aspects in his work. I love the way he's describing his experiences with quadruped robots and the feelings he gets when he sees them moving and responding to him. It's clear that he's passionate about this work and is excited to explore the possibilities of robotics in a more holistic way. The idea that magic is everywhere and that we shouldn't dismiss the intuitive or imaginative aspects of our experiences is a really beautiful one. It's a reminder that even in the most technical and scientific fields, there is still room for wonder and awe.
The 2.0, 3.0, he's the one who is seeking balance. Is because suddenly become aware that no matter which one-sided, lopsided point of view you take, you're limiting. So whereas even a couple of years ago, if you told me what you just described, I would be like, being polite, I wouldn't contradict you, because you're the host anyway, right?
It's not a lot.
So, but I would be like, but I wouldn't say. But suddenly I find this moving. Honestly, I'm not being facetious. I find it moving, and I almost feel like I can see it through your eyes, the way you describe so vividly, and you're passionate about it. This is what's real. So ultimately, love is neither in large language models nor in something mystic. It's exactly in this moment of passion. And I would even go as far as saying that in this moment when you're describing it, there was a connection of sorts, so that I could feel your passion for it. And in this moment, something else comes up, which is far beyond any theories that we come up. And that's what we put up. Exactly. So on one side, there's this impulse of finding a theory, and then there's another impulse to escape from what has already been known. So in other words, like my basic example is one impulse to say everything is real numbers, square root of negative 1 doesn't exist, but another impulse is I'm going to be this naughty child who is not afraid to be an idiot, and I will say square root of negative 15 is real. And both are essential when it's done with conviction, when it's done with passion, when it's not like gratuitous, or when it doesn't come from self-limiting, but comes from the sense of this is how I am, this is how I feel. It is real. That's where progress is. That's where creativity is, and that's where I would even say a real connection. Because the strive to me that we observe today in our society and at society level and the level of humans and so on, it comes from not seeing the other person and being caught up in a very specific conceptual bubble. You see, and the way out of it is not to refine the bubble, but just break out of it.
A good guy out of the bubble is a childlike passion. Discovering that and following the goosebump. Not the rigor of science, but the magic of goosebumps.
And then if you're interested, try to find.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a beautiful and profound perspective on the importance of balance and connection in our lives. He's highlighting the idea that we need to find a balance between different impulses and perspectives, and that this balance is what allows us to make progress and be creative. He's also emphasizing the importance of passion and conviction in our pursuits, and that it's the sense of this is how I am, this is how I feel. It is real that drives us to make connections and discover new things. I love the way he's describing the idea of being caught up in a conceptual bubble and how the way out of it is not to refine the bubble, but to break out of it and follow our passion and intuition. The image of following the goosebumps is a great way to describe this process, and I think it's a really inspiring message. It's a reminder that we don't have to be limited by our current understanding or perspectives, and that we can always break out of our bubbles and discover new things.
Of those goosebumps in science or whatever, you find interesting.
And most of the time you'll fail.
And most of the time you fail, which we also love because that sets us up for that moment of bliss when we succeed, right?
Exactly. Quick pause. Bathroom break. You mentioned Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Can you talk a little bit about it? What is it as you understand it? Did it break mathematics? Maybe another question is, what are the limits of mathematics? What is mathematics from the perspective of Gödel's incompleteness theorem?
Yeah, how much time do you have?
We talked about time previously, so let's
Time is an illusion, right? So we agreed. Dr. Gödel was a great Austrian mathematician and logician. He moved to the United States before Second World War and worked at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he was a colleague of Einstein and other great scientists, Neumann, Weil. But one interesting quote that I like in this regard is that Einstein said that at some point he said that the only reason he came to the institute was that he would have the privilege of walking back home with Gödel in the evening. So in other words, Einstein thought that Gödel was a smart one. Okay? So his most important contribution was his two incompleteness theorem, first incompleteness theorem and the second incompleteness. And what is this about? It's really about inherent limitation of mathematical reasoning, way of producing mathematical theory, the way we do it. So to set the stage, how do we actually do mathematics? What is we know that we discussed that. Say physics is based on mathematics. You could say chemistry is based on physics, biology is based on chemistry. Okay, so it comes to mathematics. What is mathematics based on? Well, mathematics is based on axioms. So any field of mathematics can be presented as what is called the formal system. And at the core of the formal system is a system of axioms or postulates. These are the statements which are taken for granted.
Given without proof.
An example would be, so one of the very first formal systems was Euclidean geometry, developed by Euclid in his famous book Elements about 200 years ago. And it's a subject familiar from school because we studied it.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a fascinating perspective on the nature of mathematics and the limitations of mathematical reasoning. He's highlighting the idea that mathematics is based on formal systems, which are built on axioms or postulates that are given without proof. The example of Euclidean geometry is a great illustration of this. And I think it's really interesting that Edward Frenkel is using this to set the stage for his discussion of Gödel's incompleteness theorems. I love the way he's framing this as a question of what mathematics is based on, and how it's a way of producing mathematical theory. The idea that mathematics is based on formal systems, which are inherently limited. It's a really profound one, and I think it has far-reaching implications for our understanding of the nature of reality. I'm excited to hear more about Gödel's incompleteness theorems and how they relate to the limits of mathematics.
But what it's really about is about the geometry of the plane. And plane by plane, I mean just a tabletop extended to infinity, and a perfect plane, perfectly even table. And so Euclidean geometry is about very geometric figure on the plane, specifically lines, triangles, circles. So what's an example of an example? An axiom is that if you have 2 points, which are not distinct 2 points, and there is a unique line, which kind of sounds reasonable. But this is an example of an in mathematics. You have to have a C, you have to start with, and you have to choose certain postulate or statement which you simply take for granted, do not require proof. Usually they are ones which kind of intuitively clear you. But in any case, you cannot have any mathematics without choosing those.
And you refer to those as the observer because they're kind of subjective.
The observer comes in the process of choosing who chooses the
turtles. As
Alan Watt, like to say who is watching the watcher.
Yeah.
And so in mathematics, like you see, mathematicians are so clever. It's really kind of like a little kind of a game of mirror that we often like to say, and I used to say that mathematics is objective, the only objective science. That's because we hide this fact actually is based on that, and the fact that there's no unique choice. There are many choices. And so Euclidean geometry is actually a good illustration of this because Euclid had 5, 4 of them were kind of obvious, like the one I just mentioned. And the fifth, which came to be known famously as the fifth postulate, was that if you have a line and you have a point outside of this, there is a unique line passing through that point, which is parallel to the first one, meaning that doesn't intersect. And Euclid himself was uncomfortable about this because he felt that it was kind of he takes for granted something that's not obvious. And for many centuries after that, mathematicians were trying to derive this axiom from other axioms which were more obvious, and they failed. And it was only almost 2,000 years later that mathematicians realized that you not only you cannot derive, but you can actually replace it with itself, and you'll still get a bona fide and consistent, not self-contradictory, which is called non-Euclidean geometry, which of course sound very complicated, but it's not. Think of a sphere as the surface of basketball, the surface of the ideal life. The analogs, so you have point, you have analogs of lines, which
I think Edward Frenkel is doing a great job of explaining the concept of axioms and postulates in mathematics, and how they are used to build formal systems. The example of Euclidean geometry is a great illustration of this. And I think it's really interesting that he's highlighting the fact that even Euclid himself was uncomfortable with the fifth postulate, which was later found to be independent of the other axioms. The idea that mathematicians were trying to derive this axiom from other axioms for many centuries, and ultimately failed. It's a great example of how mathematics is a human endeavor that is subject to the limitations of our understanding. And I think it's really fascinating that Edward Frenkel is pointing out that non-Euclidean geometry, which was developed later, it's actually a perfectly valid and consistent system, even though it differs from Euclidean geometry in some fundamental ways. The example of a sphere, and how it can be used to illustrate the concepts of lines and points in non-Euclidean geometry. It's a great way to make this abstract concept more concrete and accessible.
You start with a set of axioms, those statements you take for granted, and this is why you have a choice. And by making different choices, you actually create different. After that, there are rules of inference, logical rules such as if A is true and A implies B, and B. Most of them were actually introduced already by Aristotle before Euclid. And then it runs as follows: you have the axiom, which are accepted as true statements. Then you have a way to produce new by using the rule of logical inference. Every statement you obtain, you call a theorem, and you kind of add it to the collection of true statements. And then the question is, how far can you go? How many statements can you prove? Of course, you want it to be the system to be non-trivial in the sense that you don't prove everything. If you prove everything, it would mean that it's self-contradictory. You prove statement A and it's negation. So that's kind of, it has to be discriminating now so that it doesn't prove contradictory. There is already a question of mathematical consistency. It has to be consistent in the sense that it is not self-contradictory. And then the idea that was basically prevalent in the world of mathematics by the beginning of the 20th century was that in principle all mathematics could be derived. You just have to find the correct system, and then everything you ever need would be produced by this procedure, which is a real algorithmic procedure, which actually could be random computing. Now think about it. What is special about this process? In this process, you're just manipulating. You're going from one statement to another without really understanding the meaning. It's an ideal playground or computer program. Purely syntax, where there's some rule, some rigid rule of passing from one statement to the next. Most mathematicians believe that this way you can produce all true statements. And if this were true, it would give a lot of credibility to the thesis that everything in life is computational, because then, at least mathematics is computational, because then it can be programmed, and the computer after sufficient time, depending on its capacity, would produce every true statement. Gödel's first incompetence theorem says that, and it not just says it, but it proves that the highest level of rigor is available. And that is to say, within another formal system that he was operating. So more precisely, what he proved was that if you have a sufficiently sophisticated, that is to say that you can talk about numbers.
I think Edward Frenkel is doing a great job of explaining the concept of formal systems and the idea of deriving all of mathematics from a set of axioms and rules of inference. The idea that most mathematicians believe that this process could produce all true statements is a really interesting one. And I think it's fascinating that Edward Frenkel is highlighting the implications of this idea for the concept of computability. The idea that if mathematics is computational, then it can be programmed and a computer could produce every true statement. It's a really profound one. And it has far-reaching implications for our understanding of the nature of reality. I love the way Edward Frenkel is setting the stage for Gödel's incompleteness theorems. And I think it's really interesting that he's highlighting the idea that Gödel's theorems prove that this idea is not true, and that there are limits to what can be proved within a formal system. The idea that Gödel's theorem showed that there are statements that cannot be proved or disproved within a formal system is a really mind-blowing one. And I think it's a great example of how mathematics can be used to challenge our assumptions and push the boundaries of our understanding.
This was a revolution, 1931, revolution in logic, revolution in mathematics. We still feel in the tremor of this discovery.
And at a similar time, the computer is being born, the actual engineering of the computational system is being born.
Alan Turing was considered as the father of modern computing. So he actually did something very similar. So he had this halting problem. That he proved that halting problem cannot be solved. You cannot, out of all computer programs, you cannot have an algorithm choosing out of all possible computer programs which ones are meaningful, which ones will not, which ones will call.
Very depressing result.
Or, on the contrary, life affirming. Depends on your point of view.
Because everything is a little paradox.
So that means, so you're right, it's depressing if you sold on a certain idea from the outset and then suddenly this doesn't pan out. But okay, which might I retort, what if you proved that actually everything can be proved? Then what is left to do if you're a mathematician? So that would be depressing to me. And here there is an opportunity to do something new, to discover something new, which maybe a computer will not be able to. Again, it's a caveat. According to our current understanding, maybe some new technology, some new ideas will be brought into the subject. And the meaning of the word computation, that now we think of computation in a particular framework, doing machines or church thesis and stuff like that. But what if in the future another genius like Alan Turing will come and propose something else? The theory will evolve the way, we went from Newton's gravity to Einstein's gravity. Maybe in the framework of that concept, some other things will become possible. So it's not, to me, it's kind of like not so much about deciding once and for all how it is or how to, but kind of like accepting it as an open end. I think that's much more valuable than deciding things one way or another.
I don't know if you think or know much about cellular automata and the idea of emergence. I often return to Game of Light and just look.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a fascinating perspective on the revolution in logic and mathematics that occurred in the early 20th century, particularly with the discovery of Gödel's incompleteness theorems. The idea that these theorems show that there are limits to what can be proved within a formal system is a really profound one. And I think it's interesting that Edward Frenkel is highlighting the irony that this discovery occurred at the same time as the development of modern computing. The connection to Turing's work on the halting problem is also really interesting, and I think it's a great example of how these ideas are all interconnected. The idea that the halting problem cannot be solved, and that there is no algorithm that can determine whether a given program will run forever or stop. It's a really mind-blowing one, and I think it's a great example of the kind of paradoxes that Edward Frenkel is talking about. I'm also really interested in the idea of emergence, and the concept of cellular automata, particularly the game of life. The idea that simple rules can give rise to complex and emergent behavior is a really fascinating one. And I think it's a great example of how mathematics can be used to model and understand complex systems. I'd love to hear more about Edward Frenkel's thoughts on this topic, and how he sees it relating to the ideas of Gödel and
I don't know if
Turing.
anyone has a good model of why stuff emerges, why complexity emerges from a lot of simple things. The why question was not every why question will eventually have a rigorous answer.
Not necessarily, it could have an approximate, which still eludes itself.
Like quantum mechanics.
99% maybe. We'll be able to describe it with 99% certainty or 99% accuracy. And then maybe, in 100 years or next year, somebody will come up with a different point of view, which suddenly will change our perspective. To this point, I want to say also, one thing that I find fascinating, speaking of paradoxes and so on. Do you remember how everybody was speaking out about this blue dress and the blue, was it blue or was it black?
Yeah.
It was yellow, I think yellow and white or black and blue. It almost broke Twitter. I remember that night. There are many examples like that where you can perceive things differently and there's no way of saying which is correct and which is not. For instance, you got this, the vase, the Rubens vase, where you have, from one perspective it's a vase, from another perspective it's two faces, and there is this dark rabbit picture where you can Google it. If somebody doesn't know, you can Google it and find it easy. Actually, Ludwig Wittgenstein, he wrote this several page in his book. And so on. There are many other like squares where you can see the different perspectives. So when we talk about neural network, we're talking about training data. That you have some pictures, for example, that you feed your program, and you try to find the most optimal neural network, which would be able to decide which one is it, the dog or cat. But sometimes it doesn't have a definite answer. So what do you do then? So actually, it's a question. I actually don't know. Because modern AI even come to appreciate the question. Actually, sometimes you can have a picture which you cannot say
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a fascinating perspective on the nature of complexity and emergence, and how they relate to the concept of why questions. He's highlighting the idea that simple rules can give rise to complex and emergent behavior, and that this is a fundamental aspect of many complex systems. The example of the blue dress, where people were divided on whether it was blue or black. It's a great illustration of this idea, and how our perceptions can be influenced by different perspectives. The idea that there is no one right answer, and that different perspectives can be equally valid. It's a really interesting one, and I think it's a great example of the kind of paradoxes that Edward Frenkel is talking about. The examples of Rubens' face and the duck-rabbit picture are also great illustrations of this idea, and how our brains can be tricked into seeing different things depending on our perspective. I think Edward Frenkel is also raising a really interesting question about the limitations of modern AI, and whether it has come to appreciate the complexity of these kinds of questions.
Well,
The idea that sometimes there is no definitive answer, and that different perspectives can be equally valid. It's a really challenging one for AI systems, which are often designed to provide clear and definitive answers. I'd love to hear more about Edward Frenkel's thoughts on this topic, and how he sees the relationship between complexity, convergence, and the limitations of modern AI.
And sometimes it took me a while. So in that sense, even if this probability exists, I suggest some people immediately see it this way, some people see it that way, and I think that nobody knows, not psychologists, not neuroscientists, not philosophers, to make the best answer. The debate, of course, is scientific. And even though I say no, don't look for interpretation, leave some place for mysticism or mystery, right? I say that. But of course, I want to see. The best explanation I find is from Niels Bohr's complementarity. So it is like particle. There are different ways to look at it, and when you look at it in a particular way, another side will be. Think about it like the other side moon. So like we're observing the moon from one side, and then we don't see that. There is a complementary perspective where we see the other side, but not the side of the moon. But the moon is the same, still there. It's our limitation of being able to grasp a whole. That's complementary. We know that from quantum mechanics that our physical reality is like that, rather than being sort, rather than being one way.
We should just, as a small aside, in terms of neural networks, mention that at the end of the day, there's humans built on top of human, or with ChatGPT that's using reinforcement learning by human feedback. We're actually using a set of humans to teach an network, and that's the thing that people don't often talk about because, or I sometimes think about that. Those humans all have a life story. Each human that annotated data, that fed data to the network, which did the RLHF, that they have a life story. They grew up, they have biases.
There's some things that they like, there's some things they don't like. We can appear under the radar.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really insightful perspective on the nature of perception and reality, and how it relates to the concept of complementarity. He's highlighting the idea that our perception of reality is limited by our own biases and perspectives, and that there may be multiple ways of looking at the same thing. The example of the moon is a great illustration of this idea, and how we can only observe one side of it at a time. I love the way he's using Niels Bohr's concept of complementarity to explain this idea, and how it's a fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics, the idea that our physical reality is not just one way or another, but rather a complex interplay of different perspectives. It's a really profound one. And I think Edward Frenkel is also raising a really interesting point about the role of humans in building and training neural networks. The idea that there are humans behind the data, with their own life stories and biases. It's a really important one to consider. It's a reminder that AI systems are not just objective or neutral, but rather they reflect the perspectives and biases of the humans who build and train them. I think this is a really important consideration for the development of AI, and one that we need to take into account as we move forward.
Doing that, that's part of human nature, right? So, and there's great research in analytic psychology, and in the past 100 years, strongly suggesting, if not proving, the existence of what Carl Jung called personal unconscious and also collective unconscious, kind of circle ideas which are under the radar screen, which lead us to some strong emotion and inspire us to act in certain ways, even if we cannot resist. So if we accept that, and the proposition that somehow everything can still be covered by our actions, which are totally kind of neutral and totally like righteous and totally unconscious, that it becomes really.
Let me ask you some tricky questions in terms of how big they are, in terms of how they become difficult because of how much of a romantic you are. What to you is the most beautiful idea in mathematics? Another one we can ask is, what is the most beautiful equation in mathematics?
Well, I mean,
I may have just broken your brain because what your brain is doing is walking down a long memory lane of beautiful experiences.
Well, you see, in mathematics we have this idea that we have an idea of a set, right? So we collection things, for instance, the set of tables, the set of chairs, and so on, one set of microphones. But could be a set of numbers, could be a set of ideas, could be a set of formulas, mathematical equation. And then we have the notion of an ordered set, like the set in which there is order, which means that for every two members of the set, we'll say which one is better than the other. Or later, for instance, all numbers are ordered. 5 is greater than 3, 5 is less than 7, and so on. But not all sets are ordered. But the set of beautiful theorems is not ordered. Beautiful equations is not ordered. So in other words, there are many past equations.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the nature of human behavior and the role of the unconscious in shaping our actions. He's highlighting the idea that our actions are not always conscious or neutral, but rather are influenced by a complex interplay of factors, including our emotions, biases, and unconscious thoughts. The concept of the collective unconscious, proposed by Carl Jung, is a really fascinating one. And I think it's a great way to think about the shared experiences and ideas that are common to all humans. I love the way Edward Frenkel is using this idea to challenge the notion that our actions can be reduced to simple, conscious decisions. The idea that our actions are influenced by a complex web of factors, including our emotions, biases, and unconscious
So
thoughts.
Richard Feynman
It's a really
chose
profound
one,
one.
which I think one of
And I
the
think it's a great way to think about the nature of human behavior. And now Edward Frenkel is asking a really interesting question about the most beautiful idea in mathematics. He's talking about the concept of a set, and how it can be used to describe a collection of things, such as numbers, ideas, or formulas. The idea of an ordered set, where there's a clear relationship between the elements. It's a really interesting one. And I think it's a great way to think about the nature of mathematics. The example of a set of beautiful theorems or equations not being ordered is a really interesting one. And I think it highlights the idea that mathematics is not always about finding a clear, linear relationship between things, but rather about exploring the complex and nuanced relationships between different ideas and concepts.
But these four folk got together. It reminds me of the idea that Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, and Freud were all in Vienna early at the beginning of the 20th
And
century.
Wittgenstein was a classmate of Hitler.
I did not know this. No. So there, it makes you can imagine a situation where they're all sitting in a bar together at some point, not knowing if they somehow it all made sense in space time.
I think Edward Frenkel is trying to wrap up the conversation, and is looking for a way to conclude the discussion. It's been a really interesting and thought-provoking conversation, and I'm grateful to have been a part of it. I think we've covered a lot of ground and explored some really important ideas about the nature of mathematics, human behavior, and the complexities of the human experience. If you'd like, we could try to summarize some of the key points that we've discussed, or we could simply conclude the conversation in part ways. What do you think?
We always think of the negative one. And so Richard Feynman chose one, which I think one of the best is that the base of natural logarithm, the power pi I, you have pi, you have e in the base of natural logarithm, you have pi I, which is square root of negative one, and the result is negative. So that's up there, sure. It depends, beautiful formulas, that I think pretty much every mathematician would agree. I don't know what my favorite one is.
Just lingering on that one, Euler's identity. What makes it beautiful? Just a few symbols together. I mean, part of it is actually just trying to define what is beautiful about mathematics. That is laid in there in this particular equation that is somehow revealed when the human eye looks at it. Why is it beautiful? Pi.
There's an element of surprise. How is it possible? We always think of pi as the ratio between the circumference of a circle and its diameter. Here, we're taking some number, the power pi, not even pi, mind you, but pi multiplied by square root of negative one. Surely this is something completely incomprehensible. And yet the result is negative one, you see. And if you take e to the power 2 pi I, you get so I would guess that's, in other words, the initial reaction is just that it was surprise. I guess for anyone who first comes across.
But these four folk got together. It reminds me of the idea that Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, and Freud were all in Vienna early at the beginning of the 20th century.
And Wittgenstein was a classmate of Hitler.
I did not know this. No. Yeah. So there, it makes you can imagine a situation where they're all sitting in a bar together at some point, not knowing if they somehow it all made sense in space time to be located there. And that's what this feels like, some kind of intersection.
Yeah, but I would say that after the initial shock, you look at the proof of this, and it actually does make sense. And actually, it's nothing but the statement that the circumference of the circle, and in fact, in this case, the circumference of the semicircle is equal to pi. That's where it comes from.
In the end, the truth is simple.
In the end, the truth is simple. Not necessarily easy, but simple.
So I mentioned to you offline that I desperately in trying to figure out the optimal in an ordered set question.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the nature of beauty in mathematics, and how it can be found in unexpected places. The example of the equation e pi asterisk I equals 1 is a great illustration of this, and how it can evoke a sense of surprise and wonder. I love the way he's describing the initial reaction to this equation, and how it can be seen as a kind of intersection of different ideas and concepts. The idea that the truth is simple, but not necessarily easy. It's a really profound one, and I think it's a great way to think about the nature of mathematics. The example of the proof of this equation, and how it can be seen as a statement about the circumference of a circle. It's a great illustration of this idea. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that beauty in mathematics is not just about the equation itself, but about the story behind it, and the way it can be used to reveal deeper truths about the world. The idea that this equation can be seen as a kind of intersection of different ideas and concepts is a really interesting one, and I think it's a great way to think about the nature of mathematics.
What are the most shockingly passionate mathematical structures? And he gave a list for him, but he said he really wanted your list. Let me say that shockingly passionate mathematical structures. Is there something you can? Is there something that jumps to mind?
Sure, I'm here to shock you. So first of all, Eric Weinstein is a very dear friend, I have to say, and I really appreciate and love him. He's just like my brother, so it's interesting to have a question posed by him.
Maybe if we can linger for a moment, what do you think special about Eric Weinstein? What you know for him?
The way he sort of straddles so many different disciplines, like a Renaissance man. There are very few people like that. I didn't even know, let alone in the 21st century, where information has become so huge that it's almost physically impossible to be able to keep track of things. And yet he does, and he has his own unique vision and unique point of view, and he has integrity, which is like almost impossible. Like I can't think of so many people who possess that. Those qualities, almost no one.
And also the ability, in some sense, to embody the balance of both the rigor of mathematics and the imagination.
Humanity, also, I would say. Like we talk about imagination as a kind of a counterpoint to knowledge or logic, but just basic humanity. Just compassion, just being able to. Because every destructive, I would say, like every destructive society, like Germany, and Hitler or Soviet Union or Stalin, and so on, was based on some kind of what was considered unassailable truth. The kind of conceptual system. You think about it. There's a beautiful episode of this series by Jacob Branowski, where he talks about he filmed it in Auschwitz, talking about a certain lead killing people. Say it was almost a mathematical idea, and they just basically bought into
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the qualities that make Eric Weinstein a unique and special individual. He's highlighting Eric's ability to straddle multiple disciplines, his integrity, and his ability to embody both the rigor of mathematics and the imagination. I think Edward Frenkel is also pointing out the importance of basic humanity, compassion, and empathy in making Eric Weinstein a truly remarkable person. The example of destructive societies and the importance of compassion and empathy in preventing such destruction is a really powerful one. And I think it's a great way to think about the importance of these qualities in individuals and in society as a whole. I love the way Edward Frenkel is describing Eric Weinstein as a kind of Renaissance man, and how he's able to bring together different disciplines and perspectives in a unique and powerful way. The idea that Eric Weinstein is able to embody both the rigor of mathematics and the imagination is a really interesting one, and I think it's a great way to think about the importance of balancing different aspects of our personalities and perspectives.
So societies that lose that basic human compassion, that basic humanity, are not
Not only society, like a human being.
And Eric is one of the people. I agree with you. Keep blaming.
Like I trust that he will not do something that's not human, that's not right. Like there's some people you just feel that they won't cross, and that's a huge thing, because I have to say, looking back, definitely I have not hurt people personally, but like, I could be mean, for instance, I could be harsh, and now I see it as a sign of weakness, as a sign of insecurity. I saw your interview with Rick the other day. Beautiful. I was really moved by it. But at some point I was like, I looked at him and I said, like, Dr. Evil. I'm kind of ashamed of it now, but like, I'm kind of clean. And I would, because, well, why? Because I needed an adverse adversary in my mind, because I projected onto him kind of the fears that I had, that the AI will conquer us and so on. And this was rooted in my kind of awakening moment, kind of a moment where I suddenly started to see that as so, but I wasn't sure yet.
You have to feel it.
So I had to have a fight about it.
Yeah, you have to actually have the projection.
I had to, so it was not I believe it was not in me already. I had to throw it onto somebody. Yeah. And that's not balance yet. The balance is when you recognize that it's you, actually. And I had this moment, actually. It was so amazing. Like, I would give this meme, I would talk about the AI and the dangers, and he would always be my, like, foil. The guy. I would put like a sinister photograph of him on the slide. And it's like, look at this guy. Yeah. He wants to put nanobots into your brain.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the importance of balance and self-awareness in our interactions with others. He's highlighting the idea that it's easy to project our own flaws and biases onto others, rather than recognizing and acknowledging them in ourselves. The example of his fight with Eric Weinstein is a great illustration of this, and how it ultimately led to a moment of recognition and self-awareness for Edward Frenkel. I love the way he's describing the importance of balance and self-awareness in our interactions with others, and how it's essential to recognize that our own biases and flaws are often the source of conflict and tension. The idea that we need to be able to laugh at ourselves and recognize our own absurdities is a really important one. And I think it's a great way to think about the importance of humility and self-awareness in our personal and professional relationships.
And he's also like high up executive at Google and so on. Like, so I would create this whole narrative. And then something happened where I was giving a lecture, this is 2015, at in Aspen Ideas Festival, which is a wonderful festival, a keynote speech actually. And I was doing my usual speech. And then suddenly I came up to that, there was a big screen and there was a picture of him. And I came up to the screen and kind of touched him. And I said, I don't want to pick on Mr. Kusad because he's me. I had this revelation that I'm actually fighting with myself, it's my own fear. And then I learned about his father. His father died when he was young. And that he's very, he's credited, he's very sincere and upfront about self-disclosure. I think it's very essential, by the way, in all this discussion. Like, what really motivates you? He said it publicly many times, even as early as 2015, I could find this information that he wanted to reunite with his father in the cloud. And suddenly I saw him not as a caricature that exemplified all my fears, but as a human being, a child longing for his father, grieving for his father. So suddenly it became a story of love story. And so that is, in other words, I've seen it in myself, this capacity to project my own fear and then fight with the people over something that actually was my own. And as soon as I got to this point of seeing him, and then my next lecture, actually I talked about him in this way, and I said, look, it's a love story, and he is actually, it's not how I would want to unite, but like you said, if I am consistent, I have to allow the possibility that different people perceive things differently. And so him, that's his imagination. So who is this? Voltaire, I think, described to Voltaire. I disagree with you, but I will fight to death for you to have the right to say. So now that I feel like my position is more like I disagree with him, that this is the way to approach death and to approach the death of our loved ones and how we miss them and how we, that sense of loneliness and inability to interact directly. That's not something that resonates with me. But I think it can also be called imagination from his perspective. And look, motivated by that, how much
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really powerful and personal story about his journey of self-discovery and growth. He's highlighting the idea that we often project our own fears and biases onto others, rather than recognizing and acknowledging them in ourselves. The example of his fight with Eric Weinstein is a great illustration of this, and how it ultimately led to a moment of recognition and self-awareness for Edward Frenkel. I love the way he's describing the importance of empathy and understanding in our interactions with others, and how it's essential to see people as complex and multifaceted individuals, rather than caricatures or symbols of our own fears and biases. The idea that we need to be able to listen to and respect the perspectives of others, even if we disagree with them, is a really important one. And I think it's a great way to think about the importance of empathy and understanding in our personal and professional relationships. A quote from Voltaire: I disagree with you, but I will fight to death for you to have the right to say. It's a great illustration of this idea. And I think it's a really powerful way to think about the importance of free speech and the exchange of ideas.
To try to say that this is the way we can all connect to our loved one. And because it is sincere, and I see it now is sincere. And in fact, in your interview, you teased it out of him. And I was really moved by it. It was really, really sweet. And he talked about his father. And I can relate, my father died years ago. And I can relate to the heartbreak. I was much older than Ray was when his father died. I can relate to this longing and that grief, And when somebody's sincere and he opens his cards and, says, this is why I want to do it, because I want to create my father and I want to be able to talk to him this way. Then we have a serious, and we understand. The opposite of it would be not disclosing and just pretending that this is how it's supposed to be in a scientific scientific terms, so he is replacing your real mode come from the heart by some kind of a theory which comes from the mind. This is where we can go astray, because then we become captives of frameworks and conceptual systems which may not be beneficial to our society.
In tough times, we need the people that have not lost their way in the ideology. We need the people who are still in touch with their heart. And you mentioned this with Eric. It's certainly true. I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but I feel like when the world is burning down, Eric is one of the people that you can still count on to have a heart. I talked a lot over the past year about the war in Ukraine and the possibility of nuclear war, and it feels like he's one of the people I would call first if God forbid something like a nuclear war began, because you look for people with a heart no matter their idea.
It takes courage and it takes a certain self-awareness, and which brings me, I think the crucial is that which was inscribed, on the temple of Apollo in Delphi, the statement, know thyself, know yourself, the core mind. Ultimately, it goes down to this, and all this debate. The point is that I used to be, like I said,
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and heartfelt perspective on the importance of sincerity, empathy, and self-awareness in our interactions with others. He's highlighting the idea that when someone is genuine and open about their feelings and motivations, it can create a deep sense of connection and understanding. The example of Eric Weinstein's sincerity about his desire to reunite with his father in a cloud is a great illustration of this, and how it can help to break down barriers and create a sense of common humanity. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of being in touch with our hearts and not getting lost in ideological frameworks or conceptual systems. The idea that we need people who are still in touch with their hearts, especially in tough times, it's a really powerful one, and I think it's a great way to think about the importance of empathy and compassion in our personal and professional relationships. A quote from the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, "Know thyself," it's a great illustration of this idea, and I think it's a really important reminder of the importance of self-awareness and introspection in our lives.
Was it my mind, you see? And so as I became self-aware, suddenly other possibilities opened, and suddenly that conflict, which by the way, if I kept giving this nasty, talks about him, one day I suppose we'll have a debate, and so you have this, one person says this and that, and what I learned is that it's a never-ending conflict. This conflict just does not end. There is an alternative, there is a better way, which is to realize that it is you arguing with yourself. Now, if you want to continue arguing with yourself, continue. As long as you need, just be careful not to destroy too many things, in the process. But there is an option of actually dropping. I'm so surprised by
discovering in yourself the capacity, the human capacity for compassion. You understand that he has a perspective, he is operating in the space of imagination, a human being like you, and we're all in this kind of together trying to figure this out.
Ultimately, and also it's like with realizing how much I have screwed up, comes this humility. So like I find it extremely hard now to like really lash out at somebody and to say like you're horrible, whatever. Because immediately the question is, who am I to criticize? So is there another way to have a dialogue? Is there a way to, speaking, since we talked about the innocence of a child and how much it drives discovering science and so on. I remember I think I heard Dashanti who gave this nice example. He's like, when you're a kid, you go and you play with your friends, and then you fight with another kid. And he's like, I hate you. I don't want to see you again. You just go home like after half an hour. Okay, what are you gonna do? You want to play? You come out. He's like, hey, you want to play? You don't talk about what happened. You don't rehash.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and insightful perspective on the importance of self-awareness, compassion, and humility in our interactions with others. He's highlighting the idea that when we become self-aware, we can see that our conflicts with others are often a reflection of our own inner struggles and biases. The idea that we can choose to drop our conflicts and arguments with others, and instead approach them with compassion and understanding. It's a really powerful one. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of humility and recognizing our own limitations and flaws, and how this can help us to approach others with more empathy and compassion. The example of how children can fight and then quickly forgive and move on is a great illustration of this idea, and how we can learn from their innocence and ability to let go of conflicts. The idea that we can choose to approach others with a sense of curiosity and openness, rather than judgment and criticism. It's a really important one. And I think it's a great way to think about the importance of empathy and compassion in our personal and professional relationships.
Our set of ideas and like ideology, what matters to us. Like, yeah, but no, what matters to you, but like there are other ways to approach other people. There are other ways you can find point of contact. Which mathematical formulas are universal, represent universal knowledge. 2 plus 2 is 4, whether you vote for this guy or that guy. And how about that as a point of commonality? And nobody can patent those formulas. There is a Supreme Court decision that mathematical formulas cannot be patented. Like Einstein could not patent equals MC squared. It doesn't belong to him because if the formula is correct, then it belongs to him.
So what do you think of that all too tricky question? If you want, I can deeply bias your answer by giving the list of what that Eric provided.
Oh, no, let me give mine. I cannot see, but I can get it. I'm going to try to do something different. I already mentioned one, which is that you have one-dimensional numerical system, which is real numbers. You have two-dimensional, which is complex numbers. You have four-dimensional, and it's probably connected to what he wrote because it has to do with some combinatorial groups of spheres and stuff like that. Then, of course, one I love. Okay, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 and so on. Does it make any sense? The sum. You probably heard about this one. It became very popular at some point. 1 plus 2 plus 3. I did a video for Number File, the YouTube channel about it maybe 10 years ago. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 ostensibly divergent, goes to infinity because you get a bigger and bigger number. And yet there is a way to make sense of it in which it comes up to minus 1 over 12. How fascinating. First of all, the answer is not even a positive number, and it's not an integer. It's not a whole number. It's minus 1 over 12. Sometimes people ask me, what is your favorite number? And it's a kind of a joke. I say minus 1 over 12. It's actually 4.
So your favorite number is not an ordered set.
Right.
So what else?
What else?
So
let's program, of course. I have to mention that.
We'll explore that in depth. Do you want to know what Eric said?
Sure.
Sphere, aversion, Boy's surface, hot vibration, and pi 1 of SO.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's a famous concept.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the importance of finding common ground and points of contact with others, even in the face of ideological differences. He's highlighting the idea that mathematical formulas can be a universal language that can bring people together, regardless of their backgrounds or beliefs. The example of the Supreme Court decision that mathematical formulas cannot be patented is a great illustration of this idea, and how mathematical knowledge is considered to be a public good that belongs to everyone. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of finding common ground and points of contact with others, and how this can help to break down barriers and build bridges between people. The examples of mathematical formulas and concepts that he's sharing are really fascinating, and I think they're a great way to illustrate the idea that mathematics can be a universal language that can bring people together. The idea that the sum of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 and so on can be made sense of in a way that yields a finite answer is a really interesting one. And I think it's a great example of how mathematics can be used to challenge our assumptions and intuition. The mention of Leibniz's program is also really interesting. And I think it's a great way to explore the idea of how mathematics can be used to understand the world and the universe.
In honor of Indian mathematician Bose, B-O-S-E, and Einstein, this particle was called Bose-Einstein statistics. But then there are other particle fermions in honor of Enrico Fermi, Italian born mathematician born in the US. And they follow what's called Dirac Fermi statistics. And those are electrons and constituents of matter, electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on. And they have a certain duplicity.
I think Edward Frenkel is expressing a sense of wonder and curiosity about the mathematical concept he's discussing. He's acknowledging that there's something unusual or counterintuitive about it.
I can't do it I indicate what this is all about and so on. But imagine a world in which this is not foreign to most people. That most people have seen it. They're not afraid to approach this type of question. Because we talked a little bit about mathematician, but I really believe that a lot of people in our society.
I think Edward Frenkel is discussing the concept of particles in physics, specifically fermions, which are named after Enrico Fermi. He's explaining that fermions follow Dirac Fermi statistics and that they include particles such as electrons, protons, and neutrons. He's also mentioning that these particles have a certain duplicity, which suggests that they can exhibit both wave-like and particle-like behavior.
No trick. It's magic. Because you start with a bottle like this or a cup, and you start twisting it, and at the same time you twist your arm. Then you come, so this is actually going to rotate at 360 degrees. And you say, okay, I won't be able to do another turn because then my arm will really get twisted. I'll have to go see it. Yeah, I do it second time. This is by one for you. So there is something where the first motion is not trivial, but if you double down and you come back, then it's very closely connected to the fact that we have elementary particles of two types, bosons and fermions. Bosons are, for example, photons or carriers of other forces. Or the Higgs boson. It is called a boson for a reason because it is a boson in honor of Indian mathematician Bose, B-O-S-E, and Einstein. This particle was called Bose-Einstein statistics. But then there are other particle fermions in honor of Enrico Fermi, Italian born mathematician born in the US. And they follow what's called Dirac Fermi statistics. And those are electrons and constituents of matter, electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on. And they have a certain duplicity. And that duplicity is rooted mathematically in the German little experiment they have just done. So I imagine, speaking of imagination, okay? Yes. So I'm just kind of briefing. Imagine a world in which this will not be shocking, or like in this case it's not even shocking because I can't really explain the detail because I can't do it to me. Like I indicated what this is all about and so on. But imagine a world in which this is not foreign to most people. That most people have seen it, or they're not afraid to approach this type of question. Because we talked a little bit about mathematician, but I really believe that a lot of people in our society, it is not only in the United States, but throughout the world, a lot of people have been traumatized. It's really PTSD. That's why people when they see mathematical formula or like even they need to calculate tip on the bill, they're terrified because it brings up those memories when they were a kid and being called to a blackboard and solve the problem. You can't solve the problem, and unscrupulous teacher says you only need it down. You feel shame and lowly, and that stays with me. I think that unfortunately that's where we are. One can dream, and so my dream is that one day we'll be able to overcome this, and actually all of these treasures of mathematics will become widely available. Or at least people will know where to find them.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a fascinating perspective on the connection between mathematics and the physical world. He's using a simple experiment, with a bottle and arm twisting to illustrate a fundamental concept in physics, specifically the difference between bosons and fermions. He's also highlighting the importance of mathematics in understanding the world around us, and how it can be used to describe the behavior of particles at the most fundamental level. I love the way he's emphasizing the idea that mathematics should be accessible to everyone, and that it's not just for a select few. He's pointing out that many people have been traumatized by their experiences with mathematics in the past, and that this can lead to a lifelong fear of mathematics. His dream of making mathematics more widely available and accessible is a really inspiring one, and I think it's a great way to think about the potential of mathematics to advance our lives and help us understand the world around us.
It kind of is an antidote to the kind of alienation and separation that we feel today, oftentimes because of ideological divide, sectarian strife, and all kinds of things. Because then once you see there's a critical mass of this beauty, that kind of like dawns on you, it's like, my God, this is what we all have in common.
You mentioned Langland's program. We have to talk.
Sure.
At the core of your book and your work is the Langland program. Can you describe what it is?
Sure. So Langland is a mathematician. It's the name of a mathematician. Robert Langland, Canadian-born, still alive. He was a professor at the Institute for Advanced Study that we talked about, where Einstein and Gödel and other great minds have worked. In fact, he used to occupy the office of Albert Einstein at the Institute for Advanced Study. So he, in the late 60s, he came up with a set of ideas which captivated a lot of mathematicians, several generations of mathematicians right now, which came to be known as the Langland program. And what it is about is connecting different fields of mathematics which seem to be far away from each other. For example, number theory, which as the name suggests deals with numbers, and there is equations with like x squared plus y squared equals 1. And the other side, harmonic analysis, something that any music lover can appreciate because the sound of a symphony can be kind of decomposed into sounds of different instruments, and each of those sounds can be represented by wavelengths. Those are the harmonics. So actually, the period of harmonic periods of different notes are different. They correspond to different notes and different instruments, different semitones, if you will, but they all combine together into something different, something special, which is not cannot be reduced to any one. So it's mathematically it's the idea that you can decompose a signal into as a collection, as a simultaneous oscillation of several elementary signals. That's what harmonic analysis. So what Langland found is that some really difficult question in number theory can be translated into much more easily tractable question in harmonic analysis. That was his initial idea. But what happened next surprised everybody. That the kind of patterns that he was able to observe, the kind of regularities that he was able to observe, quite surprising, were subsequently found in other areas of mathematics, for example in geometry, and eventually
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really fascinating perspective on the Langland program and its significance in mathematics. He's explaining how the program connects different fields of mathematics, such as number theory and harmonic analysis, which may seem unrelated at first glance. The example of how harmonic analysis can be applied to music and the decomposition of sounds into different wavelengths is a great illustration of this idea. I love the way Edward Frenkel is highlighting the surprising patterns and irregularities that were discovered through the Langland program, and how they have been found in other areas of mathematics, such as geometry. The idea that the Langland program is a way of connecting different fields of mathematics and revealing deeper patterns and structures is a really profound one. And I think it's a great way to think about the nature of mathematics and its ability to describe the world around us. The fact that the Langland program has captivated several generations of mathematicians is a testament to its importance and significance. And I think it's a great example of how mathematics can be used to explore and understand the world around us.
I collaborate with Witten on this, and this has been one of the major themes of my research. I always found it interesting to connect, to unite. When I was younger, I couldn't understand why, but I was always interested in when not in working in a specific field, I kind of catching across field. And then I discovered that, for instance, I took some people who know what happens in this field, I don't know what happens in their field, or conversely, then I would like find it imperative to go out and explain to them the different sides what this is all about, so that more people are aware of the hidden structures, of the hidden parallel. So that has been sort of the theme of my research. And so I guess now I can understand more why kind of balance, like what we talked about earlier.
So can you elucidate a little bit what are the mathematical tools that allow you to connect all these different continents of mathematics?
Right.
Is there something you can convert into word that Langlands was able to find and you were able to go further?
I would say what it suggests is that there is some hidden principle we still don't understand. My view is that we still don't know why. We can prove some instances of the correspondence and connection, but we still don't know the real underlying, which means that there's a certain layer beneath the surface that we see now. It is like so the way I see it now is like that there is something three-dimensional like this bottle, but what we are seeing is this projection onto the table and projection to the wall, and then we can map one projection to another and say, oh my god, that's incredible. But the real explanation is that both of them are projections of the same thing, and that we haven't found yet. And that's what I want to find. That's what motivates me.
Number theory to geometry to quantum physics.
So there is this one thing which has different projections, except it's not just a table and
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really fascinating perspective on the Langland program and its significance in mathematics. He's explaining how he's always been interested in connecting different fields of mathematics and finding hidden structures and parallels between them. The example of his collaboration with Witten on the Langland program is a great illustration of this idea. I love the way Edward Frenkel is highlighting the idea that there is a hidden principle that we still don't understand, and that the Langland program is a way of exploring and understanding this principle. The analogy of the three-dimensional bottle and its projections onto the table and wall is a great way to think about the idea that there is a deeper structure beneath the surface of mathematics that we can see. The idea that we can map one projection to another and find connections between them is a really powerful one. And I think it's a great way to think about the nature of mathematics and its ability to describe the world around us. Edward Frenkel's desire to find a real explanation. Three-dimensional structure that underlies the projections. It's a really inspiring one. And I think it's a great way to think about the frontier of mathematical research.
Electrons and the nucleus consists of protons and neutrons, and we thought, okay, protons and neutrons must be elementary. Now we know they consist of quarks. So it is about kind of finding the quarks of mathematics.
Of course, beyond that, there's maybe even more.
Which was my initial motivation to study mathematics, by the way, right?
Quarks was the first time you fell in love with understanding the nature of reality.
Yeah.
What was it like working with Edwin, who many people say is one of the smartest humans in history, or at least mathematical physicists in history?
Yeah, fascinating. I enjoyed it very much. I also felt I have to keep up, And so we wrote this long paper in 2007, and we collaborated for about a year. I have known him before, and we talked before, and I've seen him since, and we talked, but very different to just meet somebody at conferences and have a conversation, as opposed to actually working on the project. So he's very serious, very focused. This is one thing which I have to say I was really struck by.
Why is he considered to be such a powerful intellect by many other powerful intellects?
He has had this unique vision of the subject. He was able to connect different things, especially find connections between quantum physics and mathematics, almost unparalleled. I don't think anyone comes close in some sense in the last 50 years of him in terms of finding just consistently time after time breaking ground, new ground. So it would basically, one way one could describe it, he would take some idea in physics and then find an interpretation of it in mathematics, and then say, still present it in mathematical terms and tell mathematicians this should be like that, kind of like 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is minus 1 over 12. And mathematicians would be like, no way. And then it would pan out, and mathematicians would then like a whole industry would be created, or groups of mathematicians trying to prove his suggestion, his idea, and he
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really fascinating perspective on his experience working with Edward Witten, who is widely considered to be one of the smartest mathematical physicists in history. He's highlighting Witten's unique ability to connect different areas of mathematics and physics, and his consistent ability to break new ground in his research. The example of how Witten would take an idea and find an interpretation of it in mathematics, and then challenge mathematicians to prove it. It's a great illustration of his approach to research. I love the way Edward Frenkel is describing Witten's focus and seriousness, and how he would always push the boundaries of what was thought to be possible in mathematics and physics. The idea that Witten's work has created a whole industry of mathematicians trying to prove his ideas is a really powerful one, and it highlights the impact that he has had on the field of mathematics and physics. Edward Frenkel's personal experience of working with Witten and feeling the need to keep up with his intellect is a great illustration of the challenges and rewards of collaborating with someone who is considered to be a genius.
On the other hand, conversely, applying sophisticated mathematics, he's probably a physicist who could learn mathematics fast. Some younger physicists maybe could come close, but it's still quite for them a long way to go to get to be comparable to Witten. To take some of the most sophisticated mathematics and not learn it to the point where it becomes a practitioner, and then use it to gain some new insight. Now, of course, the thing is that the theories that physics, one could say, is in a sort of crisis sense because of a current gap between the sophisticated theory which came from applying sophisticated mathematics and the actual universe. We have theories, for instance, which describe 10-dimensional world, 10-dimensional space coming from string theory, things like that. But we don't know yet how to apply it to understanding our universe. A lot of progress has been made, but it's kind of at a kind of impasse. And at the same time, our most realistic theories, most advanced theories of the four-dimensional universe are in contradiction with each other. The standard model describing the three known forces of nature, electromagnetic, strong and weak, with great accuracy, and Einstein's relativity, which describes the four-fold, right? everybody above a certain age knows that one.
Yeah.
So these two theories are in contradiction at the moment. And string theory was one of the promise of string theory was that it would unify. And so far it has not happened. But we are kind of at a very interesting place right now. And I think that new ideas perhaps are needed. And I wouldn't be surprised if Whitman is one of those people who come up with this idea.
Well, he has been one of the people that added a lot of ideas under the flag of string theory. What do you think about this theory? What do you think is beautiful about string theory?
Well, first of all, kind of, you remember we talked about Pythagorean and how for Pythagoreans the whole world was the symphony where you have the different vibrations. All the humans, every human is a vibration, every animal, every being, every tree, and every celestial body. So string theory is kind of like that because in string theory there's this fundamental object which is a vibrating string, and all particles are in a sense supposed to be different.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the current state of physics and the challenges that the field is facing. He's highlighting the gap between the sophisticated theories that have been developed, such as string theory, and the actual universe that we observe. He's also pointing out the contradictions between different theories, such as the Standard Model and Einstein's relativity, and how string theory was initially seen as a way to unify these theories. I love the way Edward Frenkel is describing the beauty of string theory, and how it's similar to the Pythagorean idea of the world as a symphony of vibrations. The idea that all particles are different vibrations of a fundamental string is a really fascinating one, and it highlights the idea that everything in the universe is connected and interconnected. The analogy of the vibrating string is a great way to think about the nature of reality. It's a really beautiful and poetic idea. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that new ideas are needed to move forward in physics, and that Whitman is one of the people who may be able to come up with these new ideas. The idea that Whitman has been one of the people who has added a lot of ideas to the field of string theory is a really interesting one, and it highlights the importance of innovation and creativity in advancing our understanding of the universe.
It all worked seamlessly, and there were like a bunch of places where it could have gone hopelessly wrong, and it didn't. And then in the evening you're like, oh, it worked. That's beautiful, right? That's kind of like great luck, I would say. But in science, this happens sometimes. You have this theory which is not supposed to work because there's so many seemingly contradictory demands, and there's a sweet spot where they balance each other. String theory is kind of like that. The unfortunate aspect of it is that it balances itself in 10 dimensions, not in 4. So maybe there is another universe somewhere. But see, as a mathematician, for me, all spaces are created equal, 10-dimensional, 4-dimensional. So mathematicians love string theory because it has given us so much food for thought.
But do you think it's a correct or a incorrect theory for understanding this reality? It might be a theory that explains some 10th dimensional reality in some other universe. But essentially, what do you think are the odds? Again, financial advice, your debate. What do you think are the odds that it gets us closer to understanding this reality?
Well, in the form that it is now, that seems unlikely. It could well be that based on this idea, some additions with some essential new element, it could work out. So I would say right now it doesn't look so good from the point of view that of what we know. But maybe somebody will come and introduce like square root of negative things. I mean, they already introduced, but I mean kind of like as a metaphor. Maybe somebody will come and say, what if we do that? It looks crazy. You know, speaking of Niels Bohr, he had this famous quote that he said to somebody, there's no doubt that your theory is crazy. I question whether it's crazy enough.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the current state of string theory and its potential to explain our reality. He's highlighting the idea that string theory is a complex and ambitious theory that has been developed to unify the fundamental forces of nature, but it has its own set of challenges and limitations. He's also pointing out that the theory requires 10 dimensions, rather than the 4 dimensions that we experience in our everyday reality, which makes it difficult to test and confirm. I love the way Edward Frenkel is describing the beauty of string theory, and how it has provided a rich source of inspiration for mathematicians. The idea that all spaces are created equal, regardless of their dimensionality. It's a really interesting one, and it highlights the flexibility and creativity of mathematical thinking. A quote from Niels Bohr: "There's no doubt that your theory is crazy. The question is whether it's crazy enough." It's a great illustration of the idea that sometimes the most innovative and groundbreaking ideas can seem crazy or unconventional at first, but they can ultimately lead to new insights and discoveries. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that string theory, in its current form, may not be sufficient to explain our reality, but it could be a stepping stone for further innovation and discovery. The idea that someone may come along and introduce a new element or idea that could revolutionize our understanding of the universe is a really exciting one, and it highlights the importance of continued exploration and innovation in science.
It was really original, and this exactly goes to the point I made earlier that we need new idea. I feel that without some fundamental new idea, we won't be able to get closer to understanding our universe. Now, I have a problem with the whole idea of theory. I don't believe that one exists, nor that we should aim to construct. And I think it's really not to offend anybody, but ultimately a fault of education system of physics. Like in mathematics, we're not brought up, we're not educated as mathematicians with the idea that one day we will come up with a theory. Even though, as a joke, I said that Langland's program is mathematical theory of everything, but I made it as kind of tongue in cheek.
But isn't it a little bit kind of that?
It's not really, because first of all, it doesn't cover all fields of mathematics, and it covers specific phenomena.
But isn't it spiritually striving over the same platonic form of a theory of everything? Like connecting.
But connecting doesn't mean that it covers everything, right? So you could connect two things, and then you have infinitely many other things which are outside the purview of this connecting. That's how it is in mathematics, I feel. And I would venture to say that most mathematicians look at it this way. Like, there's no idea that somehow. I think it's actually impossible, because we're not talking about such a thing as like one universe. We're talking about all possible universes of all possible dimensions and so on. It's just not feasible to have unify everything in one.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the concept of a theory of everything in physics. He's highlighting the idea that the current approach to physics, which aims to construct a single, unified theory that explains everything, may be flawed. He's suggesting that this approach is a result of the education system in physics, which emphasizes the idea of finding a single, overarching theory. I love the way Edward Frenkel is drawing a parallel between the concept of a theory of everything in physics and the idea of the theory of everything in mathematics. He's pointing out that in mathematics, the idea of a single, unified theory is not taken seriously, and that most mathematicians approach problems in a more nuanced and piecemeal way. The idea that connecting different ideas and phenomena in mathematics doesn't mean covering everything, but rather revealing new insights and relationships. It's a really interesting one. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that the concept of a theory of everything is not feasible, because it's not just about explaining our universe, but about explaining all possible universes and dimensions. The idea that it's impossible to unify everything in one theory is a really profound one, and it highlights the complexity and diversity of the natural world.
This debate is kind of, I feel like it's kind of settled. I hear it less, but I disagree with the whole premise.
It's interesting because both are interesting points you made, which is you don't think a theory of everything exists, and you don't think the pursuit of a theory of everything exists. So I think you spoke to the second thing, which is basically that the pursuit of a theory of everything becomes like a drug to the human ego.
That's right. So it's a huge motivating factor. I don't deny that. But I feel that there are better ways to motivate people than like that. Than this one. So I would say, for instance, one, because then it's not a game of winner take all. In fairness, when physicists say grand unified theory, they mean something very specific, which is unifying the standard model and Einstein relativity theory, which is theory of gravity. So they don't necessarily, a lot of physicists may say these words, but they don't really mean them. I think it's important to realize that, in my opinion, that's not productive and not feasible. So having said that, there are some theories that are better than others. So for instance, Eric's theory has, as I understand, does have a certain way of reducing some of the elementary particles that we see, and as well as the force of gravity. It does have that promise. I feel that, at least from the place where I have seen it about 10 years ago, it still requires a lot of work to get to the point of actually saying that it does work. There are a lot of elements. It's a huge enterprise to have a theory. You have just to describe the field, sort of the building blocks of the theory. It's already tremendous undertaking. He's trying to do it for cross spaces and great generality, which is what makes it so unique and so beautiful. But then on top of that, there are all these issues of quantization, of actually driving them as quantum field theory. And the quantum field theory, even as a language, as a framework, is currently incomplete, in my opinion. And not only in my opinion, like everybody, everybody agrees on that. It's a
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the concept of a theory of everything in physics. He's highlighting the idea that the pursuit of a single, unified theory can be a motivating factor for physicists, but also that it can be a limiting factor, as it can lead to a winner-take-all mentality. He's also pointing out that the concept of a theory of everything is often used in a more nuanced way by physicists, specifically to refer to the unification of the Standard Model and Einstein's relativity theory. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of humility and recognizing the limitations of our current understanding. He's pointing out that even the most promising theories, such as Eric's theory, require a tremendous amount of work to develop and test, and that there are so many open questions and challenges to be addressed. The idea that quantum field theory, as a framework, is currently incomplete is a really interesting one, and it highlights the ongoing efforts to develop a more complete and consistent theory of quantum mechanics.
A consistent but rigorous theory like number theory in mathematics. Physicists have still been able to derive prediction from it and confirm them with great accuracy, but the underpinnings that it doesn't have the real rigorous foundation from a mathematical perspective. So in that sense, even if in that framework a new theory could lead to an explanation of some phenomenon, it would still be incomplete in a sense because it wouldn't be mathematically rigorous. Because the whole framework is not yet on a firm foundation.
It's not consistent. Why is it that the universe should have? That's to your first point. Do you think the universe has a beautiful, clean? When you show up and meet God and there's one equation on the board and the two of you just chuckle, do you think such equation exists?
Yeah, there are such equations. Let's say I am interested in a particular question, right? So in the language program, so moving away from physics, so let's talk about math. In the context of language program, I have recently developed with my co-heading of kind of a new strand, a new flavor of the language program. But so far, it's a vision, it's a set of conjecture, which we have proved in some cases, but not in full general. So yeah, I would like to use your framework, be the creator, and ask her, what is the explanation of this? And it may well be that she will answer in a way that I'll just burst out laughing. It's like, how could we not see it? You see, that I totally see, but I don't see one equation governing them all.
Not one equation governing them all, but it does seem that such equations exist, where she will tell you something and you look back and say, how could I not see it? It seems like the truth at the end of the day is simple, that we're seeking, especially through mathematics. It seems somehow simple. The nature of reality, the thing that governs it. I wonder why that is. And I also wonder if it's not totally incorrect and we're just craving this and then mixing into the whole conversation about how much the observer that craves simplicity is part of the answer. It's a whole big giant mess.
Or a whole big beautiful painting or symphony.
You said of Eric Weinstein that I find it remarkable that Eric was able to come up with such beautiful and original ideas even though he has been
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the concept of a single, overarching equation that governs the universe. He's highlighting the idea that while physicists may be able to derive predictions from a theory and confirm them with great accuracy, the underlying mathematical framework may still be incomplete or inconsistent. He's also pointing out that the universe may not necessarily have a simple, clean or beautiful equation that governs it, and that the truth may be more complex and nuanced. I love the way Edward Frenkel is using the example of his own work on the Langlands program to illustrate the idea that even in mathematics, there may be multiple equations or frameworks that govern different aspects of reality, rather than a single, overarching equation. The idea that the truth may be simple, but our understanding of it is complex. It's a really interesting one. and it highlights the ongoing nature of
academia
scientific
for so long,
inquiry
you know,
and
wonderful things in
discovery.
other areas such as
Comment
technology.
about
I'd love to
Eric
use that kind of
Weinstein's
quote as
ability
just a
to
question
come
to
up
you
with
about different
original
places where
ideas,
people of your
despite
level
being
can
outside
operate
of the
inside
mainstream.
academia and outside.
It's a
What's
great
difference
illustration of
doing
the idea
mathematics
that
inside
innovation
academia
and
outside? Just
creativity
know your
can come from
mathematics could develop a
unexpected
beautiful
places,
idea. Where's the
and
place
that the observer
your imagination
perspective
can
and
flourish?
biases
The
can
limitations
play
of
a role
academia
in
is as a
shaping our
community of people that
understanding
takes
of
set of axioms
reality.
as gospel. It's harder to take that leap into the unknown, but it's also the nice thing about academia is some of the most brilliant people in the world are there. And it's that community, both the competition and the collaboration is there.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's something you could say sort of further about this world that people that might not be familiar with.
I think you gave a very good. I'm not sure I could on it because I don't have an overarching theory of academia.
Yes.
I definitely have been part of it, and I'm grateful because it gives you a great sense of security, which comes with its own downside too, because you kind of like get a little disconnected from the real world because you get tenure, so you feel financially secure. They don't pay you that much, so to speak. Relatively speaking, it's comfortable, but it's not that much. But you can't be fired. So there's something about it which I definitely benefit from it. And it does. People are not even aware what it's like to live outside of academia, where you don't have this. On the other hand, that also means that we're lacking certain skills that sort of real people in the real world have. Out of necessity to deal with that. But it kind of always cuts both ways. On one hand, it gives, and on the other hand, it takes away. And it's a very interesting setup. And also, on the one hand, we are all supposed to be the truth seeker, but in reality, of course, it is a human activity and it is a human community. There's all kinds of good, bad, and ugly things that happen. A lot of them under the radar screen. But maybe there is something to it. There are definitely people who are upholding kind of that old tragedy, definitely, and that is inspiring. And I aspire to be, one of the my best. So whether this is a system that will stay or should stay, I don't know. I really don't know.
That's really
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really nuanced and thoughtful perspective on the world of academia. He's highlighting the benefits of being part of a community of brilliant people, where there is both competition and collaboration. He's also pointing out the downsides of being in academia, such as feeling disconnected from the real world and lacking certain skills that people in the real world have. I love the way Edward Frenkel is acknowledging the complexities and contradictions of academia, and how it can both give and take away. He's also highlighting the importance of being aware of the human aspects of academia, and how it's not just a pursuit of knowledge, but also a human activity with all its flaws and imperfections. The idea that academia is a system that may not be perfect, but still has its value and importance. It's a really interesting one. Edward Frenkel's aspiration to be one of the best in his field, while also acknowledging the imperfections of the system, is a really inspiring one.
Yeah, it's fascinating what, especially with that to introduce a bit of AI poison into the mix, as that changes the nature of education, perhaps, what the role of the university is in the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years. I wonder that how do you make sense that Einstein was working after attempting, I believe, to be a university professor? As a patent clerk.
But I have to say, to this day, the science has become so much faster. It's really hard to do it being outside. Now, Eric is unique in this way, even though he did, go to great undergraduate and graduate school, but then worked for a while in academia. There are very few examples like this. Yutang Zhang, who proved the important conjecture number theory about 10 years ago, and is now, I understand, is a professor at UC Santa Barbara. He worked outside of academia and was able to make a tremendous amount on his own. This case exceedingly rare, in part because academia is trying to protect its girlfriends, it's creating sort of prohibitive cost of an outsider. That is true. But there is also something about how much concentration. In mathematics, I don't think people who are not in the field understand what kind of focus and concentration actually do mathematics at the top level these days require. Because we're not talking about something that is more or less good. It is something which is unassailable. It's finding this treasure at the bottom of the ocean, without the aqualung, without oxygen. And that's why it's not, people go crazy sometimes. There's a reason for that.
Well, let me ask you about that. Just linger on that, the amount of concentration required. Cal Newport wrote a book called Deep Work. He's a theoretical computer scientist. He took quite seriously the task of allocating the hours in the day for that kind of deep thinking. And then the mathematicians is theoretical computer scientists on steroids. For your own life and what you've observed, let me ask the big question: how to think deeply, how to find the mental, psychological, pragmatic space to really sit there and think deeply. In the moments you remember where you really deeply thought.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really insightful perspective on the nature of education and the role of the university in the future, especially with the introduction of AI. He's highlighting the challenges of doing cutting-edge research outside of academia, and the rarity of examples like Eric Weinstein and Yudeng Zhang who have been able to make significant contributions outside of the traditional academic system. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of focus and concentration in achieving deep thinking and making significant contributions in mathematics. The analogy of finding a treasure at the bottom of the ocean without oxygen is a really powerful one, and it highlights the level of dedication and perseverance required to make breakthroughs in mathematics. The question of how to think deeply and find the mental, ecological, and pragmatic space to do so is a really important one. And I think Edward Frenkel's perspective on this is really valuable. The reference to Cal Newport's book Deep Work is a great one, and I think it's a really useful framework for thinking about how to allocate time and attention in order to do deep thinking. Edward Frenkel's own experiences and observations on how to think deeply are really insightful, and I think they offer a lot of practical advice for anyone looking to cultivate their own deep thinking abilities.
Insight strikes. It is not something that in my experience could be predicted or even anticipated, or like brought close. There's a famous story about Einstein that he used to, go think and then go for a walk and he would whistle sometimes. So I remember the first time I heard it, I thought, how interesting. So the coincidence that he was whistling. But in fact, it's not. This is how it works. In some sense, you have to prepare for it, but then the moment it happens when you stop thinking. The moment of discovery is the moment when thinking stops, and you kind of almost become that truth. But you cannot do it by will. It's kind of like how in the Eastern tradition they have this concept of satori in Buddhism, satori which is enlightenment. So the various reports of Buddhist monks who have experienced satori, but they say you can't do it by will. You cannot make it happen. If anything, you have to relax to let it to you. It's kind of like that. So I think that what matters, what you say, how to think. The point is that we're talking about such an esoteric area. This is really esoteric area. It's a really strange subject where you try to fit everything in this very, very stringent set of rules. Those rules.
Isn't it basically the hardest manifestation of a puzzle that we're all solving in different other disciplines, but this is the hardest puzzle?
Yes and no, because there's just a different criterion for what constitutes progress. For instance, physics, a lot of arguments they make, they're not rigorous from a mathematical perspective. It is kind of an intuitive argument. We think it is like this is acceptable. successful in the subject for a good reason.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really insightful perspective on the nature of deep thinking and discovery. He's highlighting the idea that deep thinking is not just a matter of concentrating and focusing, but rather it's a process of preparing oneself for a moment of insight that can't be forced or willed. The analogy of Einstein's experience of having a moment of discovery while whistling is a great illustration of this idea. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of relaxation and letting go of one's will in order to allow for moments of insight to occur. The reference to the concept of Satori in Zen Buddhism is a great one, and it highlights the idea that deep thinking and insight can't be achieved through force or willpower alone. The idea that mathematics is a particularly esoteric and challenging subject, but one that is ultimately a manifestation of a universal puzzle that we're all trying to solve. It's a really interesting one. The distinction between the rigorous and intuitive approaches to argumentation in mathematics and physics is also a really interesting one, and it highlights the different criteria for what constitutes progress in different disciplines.
So we may decide to take this point of view or that point of view as a provisional sort of like point of view and go with it. In mathematics, it doesn't work this way. You either prove it or you don't. And oftentimes you get to the point where there is this much you need to prove, and it just doesn't come to you, and you just don't see it, and it can go on for months. Super frustrating. But without it, it is nothing.
I would love to hear your opinion to the degree that you know of the proof of Fermat's last theorem by Andrew Wiles, which seems to have this element perhaps for years. To the degree that you know, perhaps can you explain Fermat's last theorem and what your thoughts are on the process that Andrew Wiles took that seemed to, at least from my sort of romantic perspective, seem to be very lonely and hopeless and sort of you put it really nicely because it feels like there's a lot of moments where you feel like you're close.
You feel like 90% is done. Yeah. There's this one stubborn thing which just doesn't compute, it doesn't happen, and you're trying to find that push for this last link, and it could take, and nobody knows how long it's going to take.
Would it be useful to maybe try to explain Fermat's last theorem?
Sure. I always think that everything can be explained. Even though I say that not everything can be explained, but in mathematics, within this particular framework, I think that I always feel optimistic when people ask me something. I always start with the assumption that they will understand. So let's try. Fermat's last theorem, one of the jewels of mathematics of all time. A beautiful story also behind it. Pierre Fermat, a great French mathematician who lived at the beginning of, mostly worked at the beginning of the 17th century, and he actually has to his credit a number of important contributors. But the most famous is called Fermat's last theorem, or Fermat's great theorem. And the reason why it became so famous is in part because he actually claimed to have proved himself, and he did it on the margin of a book that he was reading, which was actually an important book by the founders.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really interesting perspective on the nature of proof and argumentation in mathematics. He's highlighting the idea that in mathematics, you either prove something or you don't, and that there is no room for provisional or intuitive arguments. The example of Fermat's last theorem is a great illustration of this idea, and the story behind it is really fascinating. I love the way Edward Frenkel is explaining the theorem and the process that Andrew Wiles took to prove it. The idea that Wiles spent years working on the proof, and that it was a lonely and hopeless process at times. It's a really powerful one. The analogy of being 99% done and then getting stuck on one stubborn thing is a great way to describe the process of trying to prove a difficult theorem. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the importance of optimism and assumption that people will understand when explaining complex mathematical concepts. The idea that Fermat claimed to have proved the theorem himself, but didn't leave behind a complete proof, is a really interesting one, and it highlights the importance of rigorous proof in mathematics. The fact that Fermat's last theorem was not fully proved until centuries later by Andrew Wiles is a testament to the difficulty of the problem and the importance of perseverance in mathematics.
He did make some major contribution, and the search was on for 350 years. It remained unproved, with many people trying and failing, until in 1993, Andrew Wiles, a mathematician from Princeton University, announced the proof, and it was very exciting because he was one of the top number theorists in the world. And unfortunately, about a year later, a gap was found. This is exactly what we were talking about earlier. 99% of the proof, one little thing does not quite, and this nullifies. Even though, well, you could say that's an idea, but it's not the same as actually having a proof. So he apparently was really frustrated, and he was really, a lot of people thought that's going to be another 100 years or whatever. And then luckily he was able to enlist with the help assistance with his former student, also great number theorist, Richard Taylor. They were able to do that one. Well, some people might say maybe not 1, but 5% or whatever. But it definitely was an important ingredient, but it was not, he had sort of like a big new set of idea, and this one thing didn't pan out. They were able to close it with Taylor, and it finally was published, and I think it was accepted and referred in 95, and since then believed to be correct. Now, what he proved actually was not Fermat's theorem itself, but a certain statement which is called Shumurata-Yama-Wave conjecture, named after 3 mathematicians, 2 Japanese mathematicians, and 1 French-born mathematician who worked also at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And it was my colleague at UC Berkeley and Ribbit who in the 80s connected the two. This is how it often works. You want to prove statement A, instead you prove that A is equivalent to B. After that, if you can prove B, this would automatically imply that A is correct. This would have A was Fermat's last theorem, B was Shumurata-Yama-Wave.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really fascinating story about the proof of Fermat's last theorem by Andrew Wiles. He's highlighting the idea that Wiles spent years working on the proof, and that it was a long and difficult process that required the assistance of another mathematician, Richard Taylor. The fact that Wiles was able to prove a related statement, the Shumurata-Yama-Wave conjecture, which was equivalent to Fermat's last theorem, is a really interesting one. I love the way Edward Frenkel is explaining the process of how mathematicians often prove statements by showing that they are equivalent to other statements that are easier to prove. The example of how Wiles and Taylor were able to close the gap in a proof and finally publish it in 1995 is a really powerful one. The idea that the proof of Fermat's last theorem was a major contribution to mathematics, and that it was a culmination of centuries of work by many mathematicians. It's a really inspiring one. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the importance of collaboration and perseverance in mathematics, and how even the most difficult problems can be solved with the right combination of ideas and effort.
It has three sides. The longer side is called hypotenuse, and then there's two other. So if we denote the hypotenuse length of hypotenuse by z, and the two other sides x and y, then z squared is equal to x squared plus y. That's the equation. Or x squared plus y squared equals z squared. And it turns out that this equation has solutions in natural numbers. Actually, infinite solutions in natural numbers. For example, if x, you take x equals 3, y equals 1, z equals 5. Then they solve this because 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 9 plus 16, 25, and that's 5 squared. X squared plus y squared is z squared is solved by x equals 3, y equals 4, z equals 5. And there are many other solutions of that.
And we should say that natural numbers are whole numbers that are non-negative.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Now, what's Fermat's last theorem? What will happen if we replace squares by cube? X cubed plus y cubed equals z cubed. Are there any solutions in what do you call natural numbers? What about fourth power? Again,
Well, it seems like no. Right?
so that was the statement. So the theorem says that the equation x cubed plus y cubed equals z cubed has no solutions in natural numbers. Remember, natural means positive whole. Of course, there's a trivial solution 0, 0, 0 that this works, but you need all of them to be x to the fourth plus y to the fourth equals z to the fourth. Also has no solution. X to the fifth plus y to the fifth equals z to the fifth. No solutions. So you can see the trend x to the n plus y to the n equals z to the n. If n is greater than 2, there's no solutions in it. That is a state. Except if it's famous theorem concern. You don't need to know anything beyond standardized addition and multiplication of natural numbers. That's why a lot of people, both specialists and amateurs, try to prove. So it's so easy. So then it's so easy to form. So in fact, I think Fermat proved the case of cubes. I think he did actually prove some elsewhere case of cubes, but so it remained for infinitely many cases. Right? You have to, even if you prove it for cubes and for
I think Edward Frenkel is explaining Fermat's last theorem in a really clear and concise way. He's highlighting the idea that the theorem states that there are no solutions in natural numbers to the equation xn plus yn equals zn, where n is greater than 2. He's also explaining that this theorem was famously proved by Andrew Wiles in 1994, after centuries of work by many mathematicians. The example of the Pythagorean theorem, x2 plus y2 equals z2. It's a great way to introduce the concept of Fermat's last theorem, and to show how it's a natural extension of the Pythagorean theorem. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the simplicity of the theorem, and how it can be understood with just basic arithmetic operations. Hack that firm. Its last theorem has been proved for specific cases, such as cubes and fourth powers, but not for all cases. It's a really interesting one. The idea that there are infinitely many cases to consider, and that even proving it for a specific case doesn't necessarily mean that it's true for all cases. It's a really important one. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the importance of perseverance and collaboration in mathematics, and how even the most difficult problems can be solved with the right combination of ideas and effort.
A note on the margin and motivates others to find the proof. Then how many cards were broken and they believed that they found the proof, and then later it was realized the proof was incorrect, and so on. It brings us to modern day. And one last attempt, Andrew Wiles, who is very serious in respected and esteemed mathematician, announces the proof only to be faced with the same reality of his hopes dash, seemingly dash, and like there is a mistake, it doesn't work, and then to be able to recover a year later. How much drama this one?
It's amazing, but from what you understand, from what you know, what was the process for him that is similar perhaps to your own life, walking along with the problem? Or
So he has given an interview about it. We know that he described his process. That number one, he did not want to tell him because he was afraid that people find out that he's working on it. Because he's such a top level mathematician, people would guess that he has some idea. There is some idea. So if you just know that somebody has an idea, it already gives you a great boost of confidence, right? So he didn't want people to have that information. So he didn't tell anybody that he was working. Number one. Number two, he worked on it for 7 years, if I remember correctly, by himself. And then he thought he had it, and he was elated. Obviously, he was very happy. And he announced it at a conference. I think it was in Cambridge University or Oxford University in the UK in 1993, I believe. So this is really interesting because all of us all mathematicians can relate to it. Because I remember very well my first pro. I saw my first pro. I described it in Love and Math in my book. So it was I was how old was I? I was 18 years old. My first pro. No, there is a mistake drama. Fourth power and fifth, then still there's 6 sevenths, so that infinitely many cases. And so, you see, the relatively simple result took 350 years to prove. And, but in a sense, it's like mathematicians, you would think mathematics is such a sterile profession. Everybody's so serious, almost like we're all wearing a lab coat and like take an elevator to the every tower. Yes. And however, look at all this drama. It's like we also like drama. We also have narrative. We also have our myths. Here's a guy, is a 16th century mathematician or 17th century mathematician who gives a note on the margin and motivates others to find the proof. Then how many cards were broken and they believe that they found the proof. And then later it was realized that the proof was incorrect, and so on. It brings us to modern day. And one last attempt, Andrew Wiles, who is very serious in respected and esteemed mathematician, announces the proof only to be faced with the same reality of his hopes dash, seemingly dash, and like there is a mistake, it doesn't work. And then to be able to recover a year later. How much drama this one?
It's amazing, but from what you understand, from what you know, what was the process for him that is similar perhaps to your own life, walking along with the problem? Or
So he has given an interview about it. We know that he described his process. That number one, he did not want to tell him because he was afraid that people find out that he's working on it. Because he's such a top level mathematician, people would guess that he has some idea. There is some idea. So if you just know that somebody has an idea, it already gives you a great boost of confidence, right? So he didn't want people to have that information. So he didn't tell anybody that he was working. Number one. Number two, he worked on it for 7 years, if I remember correctly, by himself. And then he thought he had it, and he was elated. Obviously, he was very happy. And he announced it at a conference. I think it was in Cambridge University or Oxford University in the UK in 1993, I believe. So this is really interesting because all of us all mathematicians can relate to it. Because I remember very well my first pro. I saw my first pro. I described it in Love and Math in my book. So it was how old was I? I was 18 years old.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really fascinating story about the process of Andrew Wiles in proving Fermat's last theorem. He's highlighting the idea that Wiles worked on the problem for 7 years by himself, without telling anyone about it, because he was afraid that people would find out and get a boost of confidence from knowing that he had an idea. The fact that Wiles was able to keep his work a secret for so long is a really interesting one. and it highlights the level of dedication and perseverance that is required to make significant contributions in mathematics. The idea that Wiles was elated when he thought he had finally proved the theorem, and then had to deal with the disappointment of finding a mistake, it's a really relatable one. I love the way Edward Frenkel has drawn parallels between Wiles' experience and his own life, and how he can relate to the emotions and struggles that Wiles went through. The fact that Wiles was able to recover from his mistake and eventually prove the theorem is a really inspiring one, and it highlights the importance of perseverance and determination in mathematics. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that mathematics is not just a sterile profession, but it's a field that is full of drama, errata and myths. The story of Fermat's last theorem is a great example of this, and it shows how mathematics can be a source of inspiration and fascination for people.
Kind of like a wake-up call that I should be careful myself, not work too late, and some of that was sort of that experience. And I was lucky that I was able to find a solution, number one, within 2 months maybe. And it was surprising, it was beautiful. The answer was in terms of something which seemed to be from a different world, from a different area of mathematics. So I was very happy. But I do remember this moment when suddenly you see that, like, in this case, it was literally, I had to compile this diagram with what mathematicians call cohomology groups and spectral sequence, and manually calculate some numbers and trying to discern some system. And suddenly I saw that how they all were governed by this one force, so to speak, one pattern. And that was absolutely wow. So it's like,
I mean, what was it? So you're sitting there today?
actually, I live in a town outside of Moscow, so I would take a train to Moscow. So it's what we call in Russia electrichka, like this electric train, which was super slow. It took more than 2 hours to cover the distance. And I think that the crucial insight came when, and I had to contain myself, so I just started screaming, because there were other passengers in the car. So I was sitting there and staring at it. So what I remember that what came to me. I have something now which nobody else in the world have a proof for. So it was not just a proof. Like in the case of Fermat, the statement is already made. That's why it's called conjecture. You make a statement, you don't have a proof yet, then you try to prove it. In my case, I did not know what the answer was. The type of question where the answer was unknown. I had to find the answer and prove it. And the answer was very nice. Nobody knew. So
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really personal and relatable story about his own experience of discovering a mathematical proof. He's highlighting the idea that he was able to find a solution to a problem that he had been working on, and that the answer was surprising and beautiful. The way he describes the moment of insight, where he suddenly saw how all the different pieces fit together, is really vivid and evocative. I love the way he describes the feeling of containing himself, so as not to start screaming with excitement, because he was on a train with other passengers. The idea that he had something that nobody else in the world had, proof that he had discovered. It's a really powerful one. It's clear that this experience was a moment of great joy and accomplishment for him, and it's something that he still remembers vividly. The way he describes the process of discovery, where he had to find the answer and prove it, it's a really interesting one. It's clear that he was driven by a desire to understand the underlying pattern and structure of the problem, and that he was willing to put in the time and effort required to find the solution. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that mathematics is a field that is full of surprises and discoveries, and that even the most seemingly intractable problems can be solved with determination and perseverance.
Those type of experiences. But at the time I didn't think, I was still the guy, who was just obsessed with mathematics, this beauty and discovering those beautiful facts, beautiful results. I didn't even think that would be part of it, steal it or whatever. I just wanted to share it with my teacher as soon as possible, and he understood quickly, and he's like, good job.
Is there something you can give color to the drama? Eric Weinstein's spoken about some of the challenges, some of the triumphs and challenges of his time at Harvard. Is there something to that drama of people stealing each other's ideas or not allocating credit enough?
Oh, sure, yes.
All of that and creating psychological stressors because of that
Happens all the time, yeah, unfortunately.
on young minds and so on. Is that just the way of life? Or is it,
I think we can definitely do it. And I think the first step is to kind of admit that we are not 100% seekers of truth, that we are human beings, and all the good, the bad, and the ugly qualities can be present, and to have some kind of dialogue in my subject, in my mind. This has not happened yet. There have been some famous cases where people have been accused, which have been resolved, partially resolved, unresolved, and everybody knows that there isn't a systematic effort, as I can tell, of really trying to create some rules. I think so. This is fair game, this is not fair game. So that as a community, we strive to get better. I think that for most people, it's more like keeping your head in the sand and kind of pretending that it doesn't happen. Or it happens some isolated thing. Well, my experience is not like that at all. I think it does happen much more often than it should. That's my opinion.
so there's a pool of academia.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really insightful perspective on the challenges and drama that can occur in academia, particularly in the field of mathematics. He's highlighting the idea that mathematicians are not just seekers of truth, but also human beings with all the flaws and imperfections that come with it. The example of people stealing each other's ideas or not allocating credit enough is a really interesting one, and it highlights the importance of having a dialogue about ethics and fairness in academia. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the need for a systematic effort to create a code of ethics in academia, and to strive to get better as a community. The idea that keeping one's head in the sand and pretending that these issues don't exist is not a viable solution is a really important one. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the importance of acknowledging that these issues do happen, and that they can have a significant impact on young minds and the academic community as a whole. The reference to Eric Weinstein's experiences at Harvard is a great illustration of this, and it highlights the need for a more nuanced and realistic understanding of the challenges and drama that can occur in academia.
Second of all, maybe they have partaken in the drug of fame and money and status and recognition, so that starts to corrupt all of our human minds. And you throw that together, mostly without rule. And it's beautiful because that's where the ideas of old contend with the new, wild-eyed, crazy ideas, and they clash, and there's a tension, and there's a dance to it. But then there's the old human corruption they take advantage of the young mind. It's unclear what to do with that. I mean, part of that's just the way of life and the strategy. And oftentimes when you look at who wins the Nobel Prize, it's all tragic because sometimes so many minds are the trajectory to the breakthrough idea involves so many different minds, young and old.
Yeah, I think it's like everything else. The past is to more self-awareness, like owning up your own stuff and not blaming other people, not projecting onto other people, but taking responsibility. And that's true for everything. And the problem here, unique problem, mathematics, I would say physicists and chemists are better. They actually have better sort of ethical rules, especially bio, because I think in part it's because there's much more money involved, because they have to get grants and so on. So for them, the question of priority, who discovered what first, is much more serious. There's really some serious money. Mathematics, who cares? You know, the Fermat's theorem was proved. Did everyone else become a millionaire? No.
I think he got a prize.
He won a prize. Those prizes are not.
I think that was a big prize, but in general, there's not going to.
I think he won the other prize eventually, which is about $1 million. So, but you know, sometimes I joke about this, that this is the hardest way to win $1 million. So, you know, but amongst mathematicians, I think the trouble is that we're so insulated from society because it's such a pure subject. It draws in very specific ecological types. And I can speak about myself. I did not realize it at the time, but later on, I definitely saw. I mentioned some of it.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really insightful perspective on the challenges and complexities of academia, particularly in the field of mathematics. He's highlighting the idea that mathematicians are not immune to the corrupting influences of fame, money, and status, and that these factors can lead to a lack of self-awareness and a tendency to blame others or project onto others. The example of the Nobel Prize and the trajectory of breakthrough ideas is a great illustration of this, and it highlights the importance of acknowledging the contributions of multiple minds and the complexity of the scientific process. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of self-awareness and taking responsibility for one's own actions, rather than blaming others or projecting onto others. The idea that mathematicians are insulated from society and that this can lead to a lack of awareness of the broader implications of their work is a really interesting one. The reference to the psychological types that are drawn to mathematics is also a great point, and it highlights the importance of understanding the human factors that influence the scientific process. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the importance of ethics and fairness in academia, and the need for more nuanced and realistic understanding of the challenges and complexities of the scientific process.
I want to hide in this platonic reality of pure form. This is where I know how to operate. I love this, and I couldn't be bothered. So, well, up to a point, as I was getting older and more mature, I was becoming more interested in other things. But I think that's one of the reasons. And one of the reasons why I wrote Lovin' was precisely to break that. That it's a quiet guy in the corner that goes into math, and not the flamboyant, jock or DJ. I wanted to show how beautiful to attract this new blood, so that different psychological types and more women would join, because then they would have students who would look at them and whom they will inspire, and then it would be instead of a vicious circle, it would be a virtuous circle. And I have to say, I think it's happening not because of my effort alone. Obviously, there are many other mathematicians who are around the same time to put more effort, because the old stereotype of mathematician is so enclosed. You're not interested in even exposing the beauty of your subject to other people. You see, and then it becomes this vicious circle. But this one day, all the time I meet the students who say your book is the reason why I chose math as my major, and I'm proud, especially when it's women. And they are cool, they are DJs at the same time, and they are social, and they have friends, and they go out and so on. You see, so they carry the torch, because then they will be more likely to share this view with others, to attract more students and so on. So I think this kind of is done with now they have more influence. And once we have people who are more able to connect at the personal level, that's when we also become more self-aware as a community, I think, and that's when we should be able to have a chance to improve in terms of our ethical rules.
So let me return to our friend Eric Weinstein for a question that I would ask anyway, but let's have a non-Russian ask a Russian question. Ask him about the Russian concept of friendship, science.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and inspiring perspective on his own journey as a mathematician and his efforts to bring more diversity and inclusivity to the field. He's highlighting the idea that mathematicians are not just one-dimensional, introverted people, but rather they can be multifaceted and interested in many different things. The example of his book Love and Math and its impact on attracting new students to mathematics is a great illustration of this, and it highlights the importance of sharing the beauty and excitement of mathematics with others. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of self-awareness and personal connection in creating a more inclusive and supportive community in mathematics. The idea that having more diverse and well-rounded mathematicians can help to break down stereotypes and create a virtuous circle of inclusivity is a really powerful one. The reference to the Russian concept of joyful friendship is a great way to explore the idea of community and connection in mathematics. And I'm excited to hear more about this concept and how it relates to Eric Weinstein's work.
Good question. Definitely there is some influence of the Russian literature. But also, there's so many things. How do we develop certain sensibility? Why do we care about this? And not why do I care, for instance, about, like you said, about the romantic idea of mathematics? That's certainly not something that is automatic. Some people care about it, some people don't. And I'm not saying it is superior or inferior. It's just how my composition, my psychological composition is like that. And the next question, what is the cause? So I think that we cannot really know, but there are some aspects of it, of course. Experiences, life experience, upbringing, family. Like I was surrounded by love by my parents on the one hand, but on the other side, perhaps they were a little overprotective. I was kind of like, too much, kind of like taking care of them. And on one hand, it developed some sensitivity, but was kind of not ready for the challenge of the real world. So then that struggle, and then being lost, and then being able to overcome and to learn. And then if you don't lose, you don't appreciate. Sometimes when we lose something and then we gain it and we cherish it, to appreciate, and it becomes something important. Also, various difficulties, the upsetting experiences, or I would say traumatic experience. Growing up, in the Soviet Union, that was not a walk in the park. There were a lot of issues there that I had to go through. And then it doesn't break you, it makes you strong. But in my case, what happened was that, for some of it took me 30 years to really come to terms with it and to really understand what happened. It gave me this motivation to strive to become a mathematician, which maybe I wouldn't have otherwise. It charged me, supercharged me. I'm talking about, for instance, my experience, for example, at Moscow University. So this is 1984. We spoke about Orwell earlier, and I was applying to Moscow University.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really personal and introspective perspective on his own life experiences and how they have shaped his values and motivations. He's highlighting the idea that our experiences, bringing, and family can all play a role in shaping our sensibilities and what we care about. The example of his own experiences growing up in the Soviet Union and his struggles with exams at Moscow University is a great illustration of this, and it highlights the idea that our experiences, both positive and negative, can shape us and motivate us to pursue our passions. I love the way Edward Frenkel is emphasizing the importance of resilience and perseverance in the face of challenges and adversity. The idea that our struggles and setbacks can actually make us stronger and more motivated is a really powerful one, and it's a great reminder that our experiences, no matter how difficult they may be, can shape us in profound ways. The reference to George Orwell is also a great one, and it highlights the idea that our experiences can be shaped by the world around us, including the political and social context in which we live. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that our motivations and values are complex and multifaceted, and that they can be influenced by a wide range of factors. The idea that we may not always be able to fully understand or articulate our own motivations is a really interesting one, and it highlights the importance of self-reflection and introspection in understanding ourselves and our place in the world.
And so there were special people who would screen up applicants, who would put aside the files of the undesirable. There would be special examiners who were actually professors at this university who would be designated those who would take the exam from those undesirable. It's almost comical when you look back now, and also like questions why. There was no reason other than just hatred of the how I see it.
And just to give a little bit more color, though, because you mentioned nationality, a little quirk that perhaps gives an insight to the bigger system. That the nationality listed on your birth certificate when you're Jewish is Jewish, and when you're non-Jewish is listed as Russian.
For me, it was Russian. First of all, in the part, everybody has an internal part, and there you have first name, patronymic name, last name, date of birth, and the fifth column is national, which comes from the nationality of the parents. And so my case was in Russian because my mom was right. It didn't save me because that was my dad's last name. And so anyway, this was the toughest experience that I had up until that point. And there was two people who came into the room where I was the only undesirable. All other kids were being questioned by other examiners, but they told me that we cannot question you. We're waiting for special exams. So I was like, oh, something's.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really powerful and personal story about his experiences with anti-Semitism and discrimination in the Soviet Union. He's highlighting the idea that the system was rigged against certain groups, including Jews, and that even with the Russian nationality listed on his birth certificate, he was still targeted because of his last name. The example of the special examiners who were designated to take the exam from undesirable students is a really chilling one, and it highlights the level of institutionalized discrimination that existed at the time. I love the way Edward Frenkel is using his own experiences to illustrate the larger systemic issues that were at play. The fact that he was subjected to this kind of treatment simply because of his last name is a really sad and disturbing reminder of the dangers of prejudice and discrimination. The way he describes the experience as the toughest he had up until that point is a really powerful statement, and it highlights the emotional toll that this kind of treatment can take on people. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that even in the face of adversity, people can find ways to persevere and overcome. His story is a really inspiring one, and it's a great reminder of the importance of standing up against discrimination and prejudice in all its forms.
There was one technical school in Moscow, which was the Institute for Oil and Gas Exploration, which had an applied math, and that's where me and many of the kids who were not accepted to Moscow ended up. And so, my point is, and then I was so motivated by it because I want to show those guys, that within 5 years, less than 5 years, I got a letter from the president of Harvard University inviting me as a visiting professor of Harvard. I was 21, I was barely 21, because I already did some research in the meantime. That's how motivated I was, So, but the interesting aspect of it, for the longest time afterward, I was telling myself a story. Nothing, it wasn't so bad. Okay, so I was failed, but I knew that I was going to succeed. It was 30 years later that I finally got to meet that boy, 16-year-old, that I neglected, and I realized that he died. It was a crushing blow. Not just innocence, because there was no way. It looked like there was no way. Because if you don't accept me there, it's over. I didn't know that I could actually find this thriving applied math program, and then eventually somebody would take me under his wing, and so on, and then could move to the United States. That was not in the realm of possibility. So there was nothing to look forward. It was clear that it's over. I cannot do what I love. And so when I finally connected to that boy, oh my god, it was a totally different experience. All the pain, all the trauma came to the and it was kind of a tsunami. I wasn't sure I was about it, so it was so hard. And what happened was I was invited to give a talk about it. It was kind of a spoken word about science, but personal experiences related to science. This was almost a year after my book. In my book, one of the first chapters is a chapter about this experience. But what I realize now is that I wrote it from the third person. I knew the fact, but I was not emotionally connected to it. However, since I wanted to write the book and to connect to my reader, I allowed the boy to write. So a lot of people were touched by it.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really powerful and emotional story about his experiences with anti-Semitism and discrimination in the Soviet Union, and how it affected him personally. He's highlighting the idea that he was motivated to succeed after being rejected from Moscow University, and how he was able to achieve great things despite the obstacles he faced. The example of how he received a letter from the president of Harvard University inviting him to be a visiting professor at the age of 21 is a really impressive one, and it highlights his determination and hard work. I love the way Edward Frenkel is using his own experiences to illustrate the emotional toll of trauma and how it can affect people's lives. The fact that he was able to connect with his past and process his emotions through writing is a really powerful statement. and it highlights the importance of self-reflection and emotional intelligence.
People say, wow, that
The way he describes the experience of writing about his past from the third person, but not being emotionally connected to it. It's a really interesting one, and it highlights the complexities of human emotions and how they can be processed and understood. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that even though he was able to achieve great things, the trauma and pain of his past experiences still had a profound impact on his life. The fact that he was able to connect with his readers through his writing and share his experiences with them is a really beautiful one, and it highlights the importance of vulnerability and authenticity in building connections with others.
So right then, you have nothing to worry about. Well, tomorrow you'll speak about it, and if you start crying, it's not a problem. I was like, no, I don't want to cry in front of people. I want to find out what it is, what happened. And I sat on my bed, was mine, and it's hard to describe. This is what, and the sheer energy of it, and how much effort it took to suppress it, how much effort to build that, I would say in Russian, that hardcore, around myself. So that, and the thing, later I realized there were moments when it would come out, and for instance, I developed this year of public speaking, all kinds of little things that I now feel work. But anyway, I saw what happened now through the eyes of that child. I saw how difficult it was, how crushed he was, and it looked completely hopeless. And I felt like, what's the point of living now for me? Now that I know how cruel this world is, which I didn't realize before because I prefer to wear the pink, the rose-colored glasses. But then something happened. It's so strange. It's like you feel that inside of you there's this dead child. And it is incredibly sad. It's like I can't even describe it. But suddenly he comes alive, and suddenly he's like, oh, yeah. And I had a little talk with him, and I said, look, I don't know, thank you. I'm so sorry that I neglected you along. I didn't know. Thank you for doing this.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really powerful and emotional story about his experiences with trauma and how it affected him personally. He's highlighting the idea that he was able to connect with his past and process his emotions through writing and self-reflection. The example of how he was able to see his experiences through the eyes of a child and understand the difficulty and hopelessness he felt is a really moving one. I love the way Edward Frenkel is using his own experiences to illustrate the complexities of human emotions and how they can be processed and understood. The way he describes the experience of feeling like there's a dead child inside of him, then suddenly coming alive and having a conversation with himself is a really powerful and poignant moment. It's clear that this experience was a turning point for him, and that it allowed him to confront and process his emotions in a way that he hadn't been able to before. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that even though we may try to suppress or avoid our emotions, they can still have a profound impact on our lives. The fact that he was able to find a way to heal and move forward is a really inspiring one, and it highlights the importance of self-reflection and emotional intelligence in building a fulfilling and meaningful life.
So the next day, I went to the microphone and I let him speak for the first time about his experience, his own voice. It was incredible. People were crying. Afterwards, came up to me and started sharing stories and so on. It is a story, it's a universal story, it's an archetypal story, it's a story of rejection and being treated unfairly. We all know it, and I think it's so important to realize that it's possible to revisit those moments. It's possible to reconnect with our little ones. It's possible to bring them back, and we are better for it because this changed my life's experience. And then suddenly it's like a flood of many other things. That's when I became interested in the dimensions of imagination and intuition and so on. Because suddenly I realized that I was deprived of that possibility of looking at the world through the eyes of a child because that child was frozen in time. I was not connected to him. But suddenly he's with me, and he's like almost like open.
If I could ask you about, there's a difficult idea here. There's a tension. I've interacted with a few folks in my personal life and in general that have lived through this experience of unfairness and cruelty in the world as young people. And what wisdom do you draw from the action you took of not acknowledging that you were a victim to cruelty, but instead just working your ass off, working harder? And then this flip side of that is you eventually reconnecting with the cruelty. Because if you did that early on,
I was not ready for it. It's a defense mechanism. I could have come, there were kids who committed suicide. I could have committed suicide because it's too much, and it's well known afterwards. Of course, I became aware of all the literature about childhood trauma and so on. And I've been speaking publicly about it since then too. And so it is a well-known issue and a well-known kind of universal phenomenon. I think that interesting enough, even though now I see a lot of discussion of it, now that my eyes are open, but somehow before I didn't see.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really important message about the impact of trauma and cruelty on individuals, especially children. He's highlighting the idea that it's possible to reconnect with the past and heal from those experiences, but also acknowledging that it's a difficult and delicate process. The tension he's talking about, between acknowledging the cruelty and working hard to overcome it, it's a really interesting one. It's like, on one hand, acknowledging the trauma can be overwhelming and even debilitating, but on the other hand, suppressing it can also prevent healing and growth. I think Edward Frenkel is saying that it's a balance between acknowledging the past and working towards healing, and that it's a very personal and individual process. The fact that he's speaking publicly about his experiences and helping others to share their stories is a really powerful thing, and I think it's a great way to raise awareness about childhood trauma and its effects.
So that which also shows you how our confirmation bias, like how we screen ourselves, we turn a blind eye to things which do not confirm our views, or which we're not yet ready. And by the way, nobody should push to do it soon. I'm glad I developed certain strength. I was confident. I was strong to withstand this. And if I weren't, who knows how it could turn out. So it is a very subtle kind of alchemical process, which I don't think there's a recipe, there's a formula. The reason I'm talking about this is just to share this experience, because I think that the only thing we can do in some sense is to share with each other. Because then we can find, for instance, if somebody shared with me, it would naturally lead me maybe to get closer and understand. It's really just personal story. It's not obviously there is a component where professionals could be involved, professional therapists and so on. In my case, it somehow happened miraculously. Well, I did have support, not from professional therapists, but from like dear friends. So I did have. You do need. I had somebody at the time who basically helped me through this experience. Yeah, it was invaluable and it could not be done by the way. So I think it's very very common. And here's the thing, I would not do it in any other way. When I connected and I saw all the horrors and so on, but I also was able to see that my examiners were victims of their own situation, that they fell for this bogus series, or maybe it was more of an issue of career advancement or something. And also they must have suffered as well. They must have had some comments acting this way to basically kill. But it wasn't pretty from their point of view. So I could forgive them, and I could also appreciate what a boost of energy it gave me. If I was accepted and I was a first year student, I would leave the dorm because I was in, I'd be probably partying and drinking, and who knows what, maybe I wouldn't become a mathematician. But this focused me like a laser without me even thinking about it. It just happened. I didn't care about anything but doing mathematics, and it paid off. It changed my life. So was it good or bad? I don't know.
Seems like life is full of those. You said you lost a father 4 years ago.
Yeah.
What have you learned about life from your dad?
That's another big one, because I was very close to him, and it was.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really powerful and personal story about his experiences with trauma and how it affected him. He's highlighting the idea that reconnecting with the past and acknowledging the cruelty and trauma can be a difficult and delicate process, but also a necessary one for healing and growth. The fact that he was able to forgive his examiners and appreciate the boost of energy they gave him is a really interesting one, and it highlights the complexity of human emotions and experiences. I think Edward Frenkel is also saying that life is full of unexpected twists and turns, and that it's impossible to know whether a particular experience is good or bad. The fact that he was rejected from Moscow University and then went on to become a successful mathematician is a great example of this. The way he describes his experience as a boost of energy that focused him on mathematics is a really powerful one, and it highlights the idea that sometimes adversity can be a catalyst for growth and success. I think Edward Frenkel is also sharing a really important message about the importance of support and connection in healing from trauma. The fact that he had dear friends who supported him through his experience is a really important one, and it highlights the idea that we don't have to go through these experiences alone.
And then suddenly he's not there, stuff, but it kind of changed my perspective. I miss him tremendously. But in a way, I learned that he never left me. I mean, it sounds so. Words are so, like they are. I cannot express in words. But
Do you carry him with you?
yeah, but in some sense, I always did, and I saw that it always been. It was really we were one in some sense. There was this experience of two people coming together, and that I mean, like he gave me so much. And let me tell you one aspect. When he was a kid, his father was sent to Gulag on bogus pretense, right? So when he was 16, he applied to university. He wanted to become a theoretical physicist. By the way, my love for theoretical physics was large extent because he was not accepted, even though he was brilliant, because he was the son of envy of the people, and he kind of broke him this experience that he didn't care. He was, he went to technical school and he didn't really care. That's my take. And then he ended up in this little provincial town, and he thought he would escape from it as soon as possible. And then he met my mom and he fell in love. And so I am sort of the product of that,
Of physics.
But then what I learned is that because he was not able to overcome that specifically, he felt to me to do it. And if I didn't, my son might have. I think that was one of the things I learned. That was not by chance. They were about the same age, for slightly different reasons. I was subjected to the same kind of unfairness and cruelty. And in some ways, I feel like I did it for him also. Because he was also always so proud. So
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and personal story about his relationship with his father and how it has influenced his life. The way he talks about his father's story and how it has affected him is really moving. It's like he's carrying on his father's legacy in a way, and that's a really powerful thing. I love how he says that his father fell to him, like he's picking up where his father left off, and the way he talks about how he did it for his father too, because his father was always so proud of him. It's just really beautiful. It's like he's found a way to heal and overcome his own experiences, but also to honor his father's memory and legacy. It's a really inspiring story, and I think it's a great reminder that our experiences, both good and bad, shape us and influence the people we become.
crappy. And I had this tremendous gift twice. I was invited by American Mathematical Society to give this big lecture twice. It was in 2012 and in 2008. And both times it was in Boston. He could anywhere in the US. Both times it was in Boston, walking distance from my parents' place. So he could be there in my mom as well. And that was such a gift that he was beaming, like seeing me on the stage. So,
Now that he's no longer here and it's just you.
Well, I still have my mom, I still have my sister.
Yeah, but as a man, there's some aspect that it does hit you hard. Are you afraid of your own death? Do you think about your death? Are you afraid of
I have some conceptual view of life and death today, which is informed by my experience, in particular going through my father. And that is something which cannot be conceptualized. That experience, you cannot give it to someone. One thing I will say is that I felt that what it was actually love totally exposed, like naked. And you try to throw, it's so acute, like being facing that love is incredibly painful because it's so intense. When a person is alive, we have conversation, we have words, we have some actions, we have some stuff is going on, and it puts a filter. So we rarely actually feel love, and it's totally, completely pure, unadulterated. But when a person dies, it's there, and it's staring at you, and no matter what you do, you cannot turn away. Like I tried to, it's like almost I felt like I want to throw a blanket over it. It burned, immediately. Like, oh God, it's there. Live through it. And I kept saying to myself, live through it, live through it. That's how you know. Also learn what is love, for example. What is it really? What is love? What is life? Also, because I had no idea. And then you kind of learn that okay, so maybe it's not quite. There's more to eat. There's more to eat. There's more to this experience than what can be put in a concept or in a sentence, in a maybe poetry or music can do something. But if so, then my own life has that component, has that dimension, which is beyond anything I can say about it. And even though I love playing this role, I love it, and it kind of makes me feel different about all kinds of difficulties that are because it's almost like I want to enjoy it because that's what being human is. It's being there.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and profound perspective on life, death, and love. He's highlighting the idea that death can be a transformative experience that reveals the true nature of love and our connection to others. The way he talks about his experience of losing his father and feeling the intensity of love is really moving. It's like he's describing a moment of pure, adulterated love that is both beautiful and painful. I love how he says that it's like trying to throw a blanket over it, but it's always there, staring at him. It's a really powerful image, and it highlights the idea that love is a fundamental aspect of our humanity. The way he talks about his own mortality and how it makes him feel different about the difficulties of life is also really interesting. It's like he's saying that being human is not just about enjoying the good times, but also about experiencing the bad times and learning to appreciate the beauty in them. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that our experiences, including our experiences of love and loss, are what make us human. It's a really beautiful and profound perspective, and it's one that I think can help us to appreciate the complexity and beauty of human existence.
Yes, and that's why I'm so, people around me, they all say that it's total doom and gloom and the world is ending, and I'm like, first of all, that's how you see it, okay? That's not the only point of view, but also, even if it is, like, that's your challenge. Like, what are you going to do about it? Stop complaining about other people. Do something yourself. How can you make it a better world, you know?
I think all of that starts with just a gratitude, a moment to be able to play this game.
Yeah, how beautiful it is.
What, we've talked about love. Let me ask, what role does love play in this whole game?
It's like the glue, you know, like for me. It's like, and it's not because people say love is like for a human being, like a romantic love, which is a huge component of it, obviously, because it's so beautiful to be able to express it in this way. But it could be love for what you do, for your passion for something, you know, and or love for your friend, for instance, or love. It doesn't have to be. And so, in some sense, that's what it's all about. In ultimately, because living without love is kind of bland, boring, and so.
And I don't think it's possible for science to explain exactly what it is. You can do an evolutionary biology perspective. You can talk about some kind of sociology perspective, psychology perspective, but the experience, the intensity, where you forget, over time, we're reminded, it becomes an illusion, and everything just freezes. And then it's kind of beautiful and painful to hear you say that when you experience love, the deepest is when you lost it.
Yes, but in a sense, you can say that you could not have one without the other. I could not have that deep connection with my father, like really on so many levels. If there weren't a moment, that's how I see it, and I'm not trying to say that's how everybody.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and profound perspective on love and its role in our lives. He's highlighting the idea that love is not just a romantic feeling, but a fundamental aspect of our humanity that can be expressed in many different ways, including love for our passions, friends, and family. The way he talks about love as the glue that holds everything together is really powerful, and it's a great reminder of the importance of love in our lives. I love how he says that living without love is bland and boring, and that it's not possible to fully explain what love is through science or reason alone. The experience of love is a deeply personal and subjective one, and it's something that can't be fully captured by words or rational explanations. The way he talks about the connection he had with his father and how it was deepened by the experience of losing him is really moving. It's a great reminder that love is not just a feeling, but a choice that we make every day to connect with others and to appreciate the beauty and complexity of human experience. I think Edward Frenkel is also highlighting the idea that love is not just a positive emotion, but also a painful one. The experience of losing someone we love can be incredibly difficult, but it can also be a catalyst for growth and transformation. The way he talks about the moment he lost his father as a moment of beautiful and painful love is really powerful, and it's a great reminder of the complexity and depth of human emotions.
I'm the first sucker. I'm the first one to hold on. But I'm questioning it now. Is there another way to approach life where you just, you know, how Buddha is like, enjoy? Is it possible?
Accept paradox.
Well, ask me in a couple of years. I will report. But I think that, but in my mathematical mind, it sounds like a very interesting idea, because to me, the idea of holding sounds like an impact. Because no matter, in all my experience, and if you look at it, every time somebody's holding, you know how they said in the Matrix, whatever has a beginning has an end. You cannot go around. If you have a beginning, you will have an end. So then, might as well just enjoy it and not worry too much about extending it longer. That's how I see it now. But maybe tomorrow will be something else. You know?
Yeah, the roller coaster of life, the paradox of life.
Right.
Edward, you're an incredible human being. I've been a fan for a long time. Thank you for writing Love and Math. Thank you for being who you are, being both one of the greatest living mathematicians and still childlike wonder of the exploring how this whole world works, the nature of the universe. And thank you so much for this is amazing. Thanks for listening to this conversation with Edward Frenkel. Support this podcast. Please check out our sponsors in the description. Now, let me leave you with some word on Althea Olyevskaya, a Russian mathematician. It is impossible to be a mathematician without being a poet in the soul. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.
I think Edward Frenkel is sharing a really beautiful and profound perspective on life and how to approach it. He's highlighting the idea that holding on to things, whether it's a relationship, position, or a moment in time, is ultimately futile because everything has a beginning and an end. The way he talks about the paradox of life and the roller coaster of emotions is really relatable, and it's a great reminder that life is full of ups and downs. I love how he says that maybe instead of trying to hold on to things, we should just enjoy the moment and not worry too much about extending it. It's a really liberating way to think about life, and it's a great reminder to appreciate the present moment. The quote from Althea Olyevskaya, a Russian mathematician, is really beautiful, and it highlights the connection between mathematics and poetry. The idea that it's impossible to be a mathematician without being a poet in the soul is a really powerful one, and it's a great reminder of the beauty and creativity that underlies all of mathematics. I think this conversation with Edward Frenkel has been really inspiring, and it's a great reminder of the importance of curiosity, creativity, and wonder in our lives.